Chapter 1677. Lu Yuan was silent for a moment before he said, "Okay, go ahead. You must be careful." Hua Xiaoheng nodded and said, "You should tell Uncle Lu about Nianji's situation. Although he might not have thought of this, he will know what to do as long as you remind him." Lu Yuan understood what Hua Xiaoheng meant, but his considerations were different. It's useless to tell Lu Jin. He'll worry for nothing. Also, he can be very impulsive sometimes, especially when it comes to his beloved daughter. I'm afraid he won't think the same as you. Hua Xiaoheng thought about it seriously and felt that what Lu Yuan said made sense. Just like how Lu Yuan's understanding of He Qingjian was not as deep as Hua Xiaoheng's understanding of Lu Jin was not as thorough as Lu Yuan's. Alright then. Do as you see fit. I'll go to the He residence first. Hua Xiaoheng had already thought of an excuse. He changed into a Soviet-made military coat and still wore the Soviet-made military cap with sable inside and outside. He dressed up nobly and had a cold expression. He specially asked the embassy's driver to drive him as the deputy chief consul of the Soviet Union in Huaxia Empire. He officially visited the He residence. This time he went to the He family's house under the guise of talking about the big explosion in the revolving restaurant 2 days ago. Because he was one of the people present and had a special identity, He Qingjian would not see him. Gu Nianji sat in the bulletproof car sent by He Qingjian and headed to the He family's mansion. She was a little uneasy about He Zhichu's condition and didn't know if she had made the right decision. If He Zhichu was really unconscious, He Qingjian would have sent him to the hospital instead of rushing to take him there. However, if He Zhichu hadn't been unconscious, He Zhichu would have opposed whatever He Qingjian did to her to the end. Therefore, Gu Nianji was still feeling uneasy when she arrived at the living room of the He family's mansion. She didn't know what He Qingjian was up to. He Qingjian walked down the stairs in a smoky gray cashmere cardigan. His custom-made trousers of the same color were neatly ironed. If it weren't for the slight gray at his temples, he wouldn't have looked old. He always had a slight smile on his face, and he looked more amiable than the aloof He Zhichu. However, Gu Nianji knew that this person was truly warm on the outside but cold on the inside. Other than the military, he only had eyes for his wife and son. This time, Gu Nianji was really flattered that He Qingjian had offered to let her be his lawyer. "General He." Gu Nianji nodded at him politely. "May I ask where young Master He is? I want to see him." He Qingjian stopped and said calmly, "He just came back from a full-body checkup at the military general hospital. Do you want to go up and see him?" "Did a full-body checkup? Did you find out what the problem was? Is young Master He awake?" Gu Nianji followed He Qingjian to the curved stairs. "I didn't find any problems." He Qingjian frowned slightly. "But he just won't wake up. I'm very worried." "That's good." Gu Nianji walked up the curved staircase. "Does he have a doctor to look after him?" "There are doctors who check up on him every day. His orderlies usually take care of him." As they spoke, the two of them arrived in front of He Zhichu's bedroom. He Qingjian pushed open the door to He Zhichu's bedroom. "Go in and see him. I don't know what happened, but he suddenly fainted." Gu Nianji walked into He Zhichu's bedroom. This was a place she was familiar with. She quickly arrived in front of He Zhichu's bed and saw that it had been modified into a multi-purpose bed. He Zhichu's face was covered with an oxygen mask from the ventilator. He lay on the bed with his eyes closed. His skin was already white, but now it was as white as snow. His thin lips were slightly pursed, and the faint red on his lips was almost invisible. For the first time, Gu Nianji realized that He Zhichu's eyelashes were so thick and fine. They covered the sides of his fair eyes and face like two soul-stirring arcs. He was too quiet, so quiet that he didn't seem to be alive at all. Gu Nianji's heart sank as she looked at him motionless. A dull pain rose from her heart. She felt her nose sting and her eyes moisten. She couldn't help walking over and calling out softly, "Young Master He? Young Master He? Can you hear me?" He Zhichu didn't move. The shallow breathing in the oxygen mask didn't even change. How could this be? Before she saw He Zhichu, Gu Nianji hadn't been very worried. She had even thought that it was because He Zhichu had been guarding the operating theater for a day and a night that he had fainted from exhaustion. But now that she saw him like this, she realized that she had been too optimistic. "He's been like this since I went to the Qin Corporation's private hospital to pick him up." He Qingjian walked over and bent down to tuck He Zhichu in. "It really looks like how he used to look when he had his illness." When He Zhichu had his illness more than a decade ago, Gu Nianji was still young, so she hadn't actually seen it with her own eyes. Of course, even if she had seen it with her own eyes, she had forgotten it all now that she had lost her memories at the age of 12. "But young Master He told me that he had recovered." Gu Nianji said subconsciously. She combed her drooping hair with her hand. I've checked the information. Diseases that are cured at the genetic level won't relapse. If there's a relapse, then either he hasn't been cured at all, or he has another disease. Yi Qingjian nodded. That's what the doctor said too. He also said that if his vital signs are normal, don't worry about it for the time being. If he wants to sleep, let him sleep. Gu Nianji breathed a sigh of relief. I also hope that he's just asleep. However, I still don't understand. Young master, he stayed in that ward for a day and a night, right? How did he end up like this? It didn't seem like he was overworked. What exactly did he do in there? He didn't do anything, Yi Qingjian said coldly. I looked at the surveillance footage of that ward. They were actually very normal that night. He Zhichu had been sitting on the sofa in the corner. Qin Yaoguang was sitting in front of Old Master Qin's bed in a light green surgical gown. Old Master Qin was sleeping comfortably in the oxygen mask. Do you have the surveillance footage of that ward? Can you show it to me? Gu Nianji asked curiously. Also, you said that you want me to be your lawyer. May I ask if you're sincere? Of course. Yi Qingjian stared at her. For the first time, he realized that Gu Nianji's expression when she spoke was actually quite similar to Qin Suan's. Although the two of them looked completely different, every frown, smile, and every move they made people inexplicably think of Qin Suan. This was a kind of similarity in temperament and personality between the two of them. It was an existence that was more profound than their appearance. Because of this similarity, Yi Qingjian's heart softened. He said gently, of course it's true. I arrested Qin Yaoguang and Qin Beiyoi. Gu Nianji quickly said, you didn't arrest them. You invited them back to help treat young Master He's illness. Yi Qingjian sighed and couldn't help rubbing Gu Nianji's head with his hand. No wonder everyone loves you. Gu Nianji smiled and thought to herself, I don't dare expect you to love me. As long as you don't point your sniper rifle at me, I'll be thankful. She deliberately avoided the topic and said, because of Qin Yaoguang and Old Master Qin, when Shuyi said she was going to send you a lawyer's letter, right? She didn't say she was going to send me a lawyer's letter. Yi Qingjian shook his head. But she said she was going to sue us. Sending a lawyer's letter and a lawsuit were two different things. From sending a lawyer's letter to going to court, there were still many steps to go through. Okay, then let's fight. Gu Nianji didn't think much of it. She looked at Yi Qingjian inquiringly. General He, can you show me the surveillance footage of that ward? Yi Qingjian nodded. Sure, it's in my study. Gu Nianji knew that Yi Qingjian's study had always been off-limits to outsiders. She used to have the right to enter, but now she no longer had the right. However, Yi Qingjian didn't seem to care. He stood up and said, follow me. Gu Nianji's eyes flashed, but she didn't follow him. Instead, she said, why don't you take it to this room and I'll watch it on my laptop? I want to stay here with young Master He for a while. That works too. Yi Qingjian saw that Gu Nianji had taken the initiative to take care of He Zhichu, so his impression of her improved a little. His voice became even gentler. Then I'll go get the surveillance footage. I'll send it to you in the flash drive. As soon as he walked out of He Zhichu's bedroom, he saw his orderly jogging over and saying, Chief Mr. Peter, the Deputy Chief Consul of the Soviet Union in Wuxia Empire, requests an audience. He said he has something important to discuss with General He. This was today's second update, Chapter 1666. No wonder everyone loves you. May's double monthly votes were on the 7th day of the month. Hurry up and cast your monthly votes. Don't keep your monthly votes until the end of the month. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1678. Deputy Chief Counsel Peter? Yi Qingjian's eyes flashed. This person was not a real diplomat. In order to get Yi Qingjian's help in the Dresden incident, the Soviet Union expressed their greatest sincerity, which was to reveal the true appearance of the KGB's ace of the Far East to Yi Qingjian. It was Hua Xiaoheng's counterpart in the other world, Peter Hua Xiaoheng. Yi Qingjian was suspicious by nature. It wasn't that he hadn't suspected the true identity of the ace of the Far East. Later on, in order to completely eradicate any future troubles, he didn't care who this person was. In any case, he just had to kill him. The only one who had miscalculated was Gu Nianji. She had caused a loophole in his death trap, and the ace of the Far East had been able to escape. However, after the identity of the ace of the Far East was exposed, the KGB of the Soviet Union no longer arranged secret jobs for him. Instead, they made him a diplomat. It was normal for him to go from the dark to the light. It was the same routine for the intelligence agencies of various countries. But now he was only a Soviet diplomat. What right did he have to meet with the Wuxia Imperial Military's supreme leader? Besides, He Qingjian knew very well that the ace of the Far East, Peter, was pursuing Gu Nianji because she had saved his life. It was also probably because of the corresponding body that he was attracted to her. But what did that have to do with him? He Qingjian didn't want Gu Nianji to have any contact with the ace of the Far East, Peter, at all. He walked straight ahead without moving his eyes. I'm very busy. I won't see you. The orderly scratched his head and looked at He Qingjian's disappearing back. He didn't dare to chase after him, so he could only turn back and go to the front door of the mansion. Huo Xiaoheng, who was waiting there, said, Mr. Peter, our chief is very busy and doesn't have time to see you now. Why don't you leave a message and I'll report it to our chief later? Huo Xiaoheng wasn't surprised that He Qingjian was talking to him. If they were in the other world, Huo Xiaoheng could guarantee that he would be even more bureaucratic than He Qingjian. He smiled. Why did he speak in a bureaucratic manner? Because they were the kind of people who wouldn't release the eagle until they saw the rabbit. Your general, he is truly a good chief who is loyal to the country. How could the highest commander of the empire be idle? I understand. Huo Xiaoheng was very sincere, as if he didn't mean anything else. The orderly had heard this kind of flattery many times and didn't care at first. However, this kind of vulgar flattery sounded so real coming from Huo Xiaoheng's mouth. The orderly chuckled. It's good that you know our chief's difficulties. Of course I know. Huo Xiaoheng said seriously, if it wasn't an emergency, I wouldn't have come so late to see your chief. Please go back and report that the matter I want to discuss this time is related to the revolving restaurant explosion a few days ago, and is also related to Major General He's only son, He Zhichu. Hearing that it had something to do with young Master He, the orderly became serious. Mr. Peter, do you have any concrete evidence? If there is, I can report it again right away. Of course I do, but I will only take it out when I see your chief. Huo Xiaoheng was very serious, and there was a hint of eagerness on his face. He did indeed look like he had obtained important insider information. When the orderly remembered that he was a Soviet diplomat and how powerful the Soviet Union was, he became more cautious. Please wait a moment, I'll go again. The orderly wasn't qualified to make an internal call to He Qingjian, so he could only run to the mansion again and again. Reporting to Chief. The Deputy Chief Consul of the Soviet Union, Peter, said that he has something important to discuss with you. It's about the explosion of the revolving restaurant a few days ago, and it's said that it has something to do with young Master He. He Qingjian was looking at the documents in the study. When he heard this, he took off his reading glasses and pressed the intercom in the study. He said to the orderly at the door, what did he say exactly? The orderly repeated Huo Xiaoheng's exact words without missing a single word. He Qingjian heard that there was a hidden meaning in the ace of the Far East's words, and he seemed to have accurate inside information. However, the ace of the Far East wouldn't take it out unless he saw him in person. He Qingjian pondered for a moment. He remembered that He Zhichu had said that the ace of the Far East had been at the scene of the explosion. With his skills, he might really be able to find some clues. As for the Soviet snipers and Soviet-made weapons in the opposite building, He Qingjian had seen them in He Zhichu's secret report. However, like He Zhichu, he didn't think that this matter had anything to do with the Soviets at all. Those Soviet snipers looked like mercenaries, and mercenaries had all kinds of nationalities. Using such a method to confuse people would only make a fool of themselves in the eyes of someone like He Qingjian. So what kind of secret information did the ace of the Far East have? He Qingjian finally nodded. Let him in and take him to the small meeting room. The small meeting room of the He residence was second only to He Qingjian's study in terms of secrecy. The orderly breathed a sigh of relief and quickly returned to the door. He opened the door and let Huo Xiaoheng in. He smiled and said, the chief has invited you in. He personally led Huo Xiaoheng to the small meeting room of the He residence. Reporting to the chief, Mr. Peter is here. He Qingjian's slightly smiling voice came from the small meeting room. Invite Mr. Peter in. Huo Xiaoheng walked into the small meeting room. His expression didn't change, but he had already sized up the small meeting room from the corner of his eyes. If he wasn't mistaken, there were surveillance cameras on the roofs of the four corners of the small meeting room. There were at least 9 pinhole cameras in the room, covering all angles. The light yellow curtains with geometric patterns hung on the wall opposite the meeting room. They were the only bright spot in the meeting room. He Qingjian sat at the head of the only rectangular conference table in the room and looked at him with a smile. Huo Xiaoheng sat down on the seat on He Qingjian's right and said with a smile, General, he is in a good mood. Could it be that you already have an idea about this matter? As soon as Huo Xiaoheng finished speaking, He Qingjian frowned. He waved his hand. What do you mean? I was hoping that Mr. Peter would be able to give us some pointers. I wouldn't dare. Huo Xiaoheng bowed slightly and was very humble. I just happened to be there at the time, so I noticed that something was wrong. Something's wrong? How could such an explosion happen in a restaurant in our country's capital? He Qingjian pounded the table in pain. This is insane. His anger was not fake at all. What happened was a complete provocation to the government. Huo Xiaoheng nodded heavily. General, he is right. Not only that, but the whole thing happened very strangely. I wonder how General He's investigation is going? He Qingjian suddenly sighed as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. He thought of He Zhichu, who was still unconscious on the hospital bed, and his voice softened. My son He Zhichu was originally in charge of investigating this case, but he just met with misfortune, so the police took over. God knows when they will be able to find the mastermind behind this. Huo Xiaoheng pretended to be shocked. What happened to young Master He? What misfortune did he encounter? Is it serious? He Qingjian's face was mournful. He's unconscious now, and the doctor said he doesn't know when he'll wake up. He looked up at Huo Xiaoheng and continued, Mr. Peter, I know you're a capable person. Right now, our country is short on manpower and you happen to be there at the time. I sincerely hope that you can lend us a hand and help us investigate this case. On behalf of all the victims, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to you. As he spoke, he stood up and bowed to Huo Xiaoheng. Huo Xiaoheng cursed this old fox in his heart. He had deliberately shown weakness in order to find free labor to help him investigate the case. He was the ace of the KGB's Far East Bureau. He Qingjian only wanted to open his mouth and say, thank you, to get him to investigate the case. How shameless could he be? Although Huo Xiaoheng was cursing him in his heart, he didn't show it on his face. He said awkwardly, General He, I'm a diplomat of the Soviet Union. This case is your internal affairs. I can't interfere in your internal affairs. He Qingjian had a smile on his face, but he was also cursing the ace of the Far East in his heart. He wanted to woo Gu Nianji, but he didn't show any sincerity. He didn't help the Huaxia Empire shed some blood and suffer some injuries, so he wanted to marry the Huaxia Empire's girl? Don't dream too beautifully. Then why did Mr. Peter come to see me? He Qingjian didn't hesitate to attack Huo Xiaoheng. Didn't you say you were here to discuss the case? I'm asking you to investigate the case, and now you say you can't interfere in internal affairs? Huo Xiaoheng was choked by He Qingjian, but he didn't blush at all. He smiled and said, this is different. I'm now telling General He some of my findings as a victim. I'm assisting in the investigation. This case is a criminal case, and diplomats can assist in the investigation. Criminal cases could even involve Interpol, so if foreign diplomats were involved in a criminal case, they had the obligation to assist in the investigation. However, directly helping to investigate the case would be interfering in the internal affairs of another country. He Qingjian looked at Huo Xiaoheng speechlessly. He thought to himself that the ace of the Far East was indeed the ace of the Far East. He could even shut him up. He raised his hand. Then tell me what's the big discovery? Huo Xiaoheng looked up at He Qingjian and tried to figure out his mentality. He said carefully, I detected traces of the CX series of high explosives at the scene of the explosion. He Qingjian's pupils constricted, but he still said calmly, yes, I saw it in the report. Then, the CX series of high explosives has very strict and sophisticated production requirements. Ordinary people can't make it without the corresponding equipment. Do you need to tell me that? This is your secret information? He Qingjian's expression darkened and he almost sneered. Mr. Peter, I'm very busy. Please don't waste each other's time. Even if the corresponding equipment can be made, how can it be installed in Luo Piapiao's phone? Huo Xiaoheng continued unhurriedly. Installed in Luo Piapiao's phone? He Qingjian subconsciously narrowed his eyes. How did you know it was installed in Luo Piapiao's phone? Because I was outside the bathroom at the time, and I heard Luo Piapiao answer a phone call with my own ears. Then, I heard the countdown of the remote bomb on the phone. This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1667, Pointing the Way. May's double monthly votes were on the 7th day of the month. Dear friends, hurry up and vote. Don't keep the monthly votes until the end of the month, at 8 o'clock in the evening, the second update. Moi big shots, little angels. Chapter 1679. You heard the countdown to the remote bomb on your phone? He Qingjian asked in disbelief. How did you hear it? Huo Xiaoheng didn't answer him. He continued calmly, At that time, Luo Piapiao was with Miss Gu and was talking in the bathroom. He Chengjian pursed his lips, and the wrinkles on both sides of his nose became obvious. It made him look like a difficult person to please. What do you mean, Mr. Peter? If Nianji had been with Luo Piapiao at that time, Luo Piapiao's phone would have had a CX series of high explosives. I wonder why Luo Piapiao died but Nianji was fine. Was Xiaoheng told He Qingjian honestly, because of me I heard the countdown and knew that something was wrong. I quickly rushed in and pulled Miss Gu away. We ran fast but the aftermath of the explosion still injured me. Was Xiaoheng showed an appropriate show of weakness in front of He Qingjian. I haven't been out for the past few days because I've been recuperating in the embassy. If you don't believe me you can ask the people you planted in the embassy. He Qingjian couldn't help coughing twice to hide his embarrassment. It was common practice for countries to plant informants in each other's embassies. However, it was embarrassing to be pointed out by Huo Xiaoheng. As the highest military commander in the military, He Qingjian still wanted his face. Huo Xiaoheng smiled slightly. You understand what I mean, right? Even with my skills I was almost affected by the bomb, let alone Miss Gu and Luo Piapiao. They are two weak women who can't even trust a chicken. They couldn't have dodged a sudden bomb on their own. That's why Luo Piapiao was killed. He Qingjian sighed. She's a citizen of our country. I won't let her die in vain. Huo Xiaoheng nodded. I knew I was right about you. He Qingjian laughed. Then what's the use of saying all this? Come and help us investigate the case. Of course Huo Xiaoheng refused. He had nothing better to do than investigate the case under someone else's surveillance. That would be embarrassing for the KGB. He didn't reply and continued calmly. From what I saw, the target of the explosion was actually two people, Luo Piapiao and Miss Gu. But they missed me, so Miss Gu escaped and wasn't killed by the bomb. Yes, didn't you publicly announce that you wanted to pursue Nianji? This is the time for you to shine. He Qingjian leaned back in his chair with a faint smile. The light in his eyes was as deep as the night sky. No one could see through him, as if no light could escape from a black hole. How could Huo Xiaoheng be tricked by He Qingjian? He followed his own train of thought and led He Qingjian in the direction of He Zhichu. I didn't do anything. I just wanted to tell you what I know so that you can investigate the case as soon as possible. As it turns out, I was right to come here. Huo Xiaoheng was very humble. He leaned forward slightly. I just heard you say that something happened to young Master He, and I suddenly had an idea. Did the other party set up a chain of traps? Chain game? He Qingjian stopped smiling and his expression became serious. Tell me in detail. It's very simple. The opponent is Xiang Zhuang brandishing his sword with the intention of Duke Pei. Huo Xiaoheng used an old idiom to express what he meant. On the surface, the ones who suffered from their explosion were the Qin family, including Luo Piapiao and Gu Nianji. They are both granddaughters of the Qin family. But if something happened to Gu Nianji, who would suffer the most? Huo Xiaoheng's eyes flashed. Look, something happened to young Master He right after that. Is there any connection between the two that we don't know about? He Qingjian's heart was suddenly in turmoil, but on the surface he still had a puzzled expression. He said, what unknown connection? You mean between Nianji and Achu? They used to be unmarried but they're not anymore. Huo Xiaoheng secretly mocked He Qingjian's pretense, but he also understood his actions and concerns. At a time like this, He Qingjian still didn't tell him about Gu Nianji's special constitution and perfect genes. It could be assumed that even if he treated Gu Nianji as medicine, it was the only medicine that could be used on He Zhichu. No one else had the right to know about it. In fact, in He Qingjian's heart, he was already certain that something had happened to Gu Nianji, and then He Zhichu's old illness had relapsed. Combining the two, the other party's real target was actually He Zhichu. Oh, so that means there's no connection between the two? Then I'm just overthinking it. Huo Xiaoheng shook his head and stood up. I heard you say that young Master He is unconscious. Can I go see him? We also have some drugs in the Soviet Union that can suddenly make people unconscious. Maybe I can help young Master He. Huo Xiaoheng was in a particularly good mood when he saw that He Qingjian had already believed him. However, even though he was in a good mood, he still had a poker face. He Qingjian immediately said, no problem, come with me. He knew that the ace of the Far East was talking about some special drugs from the KGB. If he could see the scene he wouldn't care so much. He Qingjian brought Huo Xiaoheng to He Zhichu's bedroom. Gu Nianji sat on the sofa in front of He Zhichu's bed with a laptop on her knees. She was studying the surveillance video in Grandfather Qin's ward frame by frame. When she heard someone come in, she immediately paused the video and looked up. A tall man in a Soviet-made military uniform walked out from behind He Qingjian with a coat over his arm. He nodded at Gu Nianji and greeted her. "Miss Gu, you're here too?" Without waiting for Gu Nianji to answer, he immediately turned to look at He Jichu on the bed. He Jichu's face was still pale, but his breathing was normal. He seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep, and the electroencephalogram showed delta waves. This was because there were 4 types of brain waves: alpha waves, beta waves, theta waves, and delta waves. The last type was the brain waves produced when the human brain entered a deep sleep. Hua Xiaoheng didn't know much about this, but he had received some kind of training, so he roughly knew the classification of brain waves. "It doesn't look like there's a big problem," Hua Xiaoheng said calmly. "The human body's self-healing ability is the strongest when it's asleep. Perhaps young master he is conserving his energy." "Then can you tell what kind of drug he's being affected by?" He Qingjian asked anxiously. Hua Xiaoheng shook his head. "His symptoms are unlikely to be caused by our country's drugs. As far as I know, our country's drugs will keep people unconscious, but the brain will be more active, so his symptoms aren't very suitable." Gu Nianji frowned and interrupted, "Why do you think it's the effects of drugs? I've watched this video many times. Young master he didn't even drink any water. If it's the drugs, how did they affect him? Is it the air?" Hua Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat. "It's also possible. Air is a good medium for transmission. Maybe it's through the air?" Gu Nianji had just said it casually. Seeing that Hua Xiaoheng actually took it seriously, she felt a little smug and said, "What kind of drugs can be transmitted through the air? Do you think it's viruses and bacteria?" Yi Qingjian also came to his senses. He slapped his head and said, "Viruses and bacteria? Quick someone. Get the anti-chemical defense team to take samples from that sealed ward." Gu Nianji, QAQ. She had just said it casually. There was no need to take it seriously, right? She felt that it wasn't that simple. However, Hua Xiaoheng felt that it was indeed necessary to mobilize the anti-chemical defense team. If there was something unfamiliar there, the anti-chemical defense team would be the first to isolate them. He Qingjian was in a hurry to mobilize the anti-chemical defense team. Hua Xiaoheng looked at Gu Nianji. "Miss Gu, have you been busy the past 2 days?" Gu Nianji nodded and said seriously, "Busy, very busy. I'm so busy that I'm dying." "Then why did you have time to come out today?" Hua Xiaoheng continued to ask. Gu Nianji cursed silently. She knew that Major General Hua's problem had never existed in isolation. He asked a question and there were a lot of other questions that followed. If he wasn't careful, he would fall into a pit. Gu Nianji closed the notebook on her knees and said seriously, "I took the time to come over today to see young master he. Now that I see that he's fine, I'm relieved. I can go home now." He Qingjian had already left He Jichu's bedroom, but Hua Xiaoheng was still very cautious when he spoke to Gu Nianji. This was the He family's territory. The word accidentally had no place here. "Are you sure you can go home?" Hua Xiaoheng glanced at He Jichu, who was lying on the bed, and reminded Gu Nianji, "If you want to go home early, you'd better pray that young master he wakes up early." This was today's second update, chapter 1668, Bringing Trouble to the East. May's double monthly votes were on the 7th day of the month. Dear friends, hurry up and vote. Don't keep the monthly votes until the end of the month. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1680. Gu Nianji was immersed in the excitement of seeing Hua Xiaoheng again. She had to maintain her composure, so she didn't react immediately. "It's good that young master he is fine. It's useless for me to be here. There's no need to wait for him to wake up. I have to go back now." Gu Nianji looked at Hua Xiaoheng with a smile, her eyes hiding an unknown longing and love. Hua Xiaoheng didn't look at her. He tossed the Soviet-made military coat over his arm onto the couch against the wall in the living room. He walked to He Jichu's bed in the bedroom and carefully examined his condition. The data displayed by the various instruments in the room was relatively normal. The only thing that was not normal was his pale face. If he was really asleep, his face shouldn't be so pale, not to mention he was wearing an oxygen mask. Gu Nianji froze when she saw Hua Xiaoheng walk past her and go directly to He Jichu's bedside to observe his condition. She slowly regained her senses. She thought about everything Hua Xiaoheng had said and finally realized what he meant. If He Jichu didn't wake up, she couldn't go back? So what he meant was that she was actually under house arrest by He Qingjian? But why was He Qingjian putting her under house arrest? She wasn't a doctor and she didn't know how to treat illnesses. Wait a minute, treatment? Gu Nianji suddenly understood. Her face, which had been flushed with excitement, instantly turned as pale as snow. When Shuyi had said that He Jichu had relapsed. Although she didn't believe it, and He Qingjian had also said that he didn't believe it, a person like him would never forget to be prepared, right? In other words, he didn't believe that He Jichu's old illness had relapsed, but if it was related to his old illness, or if it was a similar new illness, he would have to use Gunyanji as He Jichu's medicine? This was the only way to explain what Hua Xiaoheng was implying, wasn't it? Gunyanji immediately tensed up, but she pretended to be nonchalant and said, "Mr. Peter, please have a seat. I'll be going now." She had already uploaded the video to her cloud account. She turned off her laptop as if nothing had happened and placed it back on He Jichu's desk in his bedroom. She picked up her Hermes red envelope and walked out of the bedroom. She walked through the living room, pushed open the door to the suite and walked straight out. She didn't go far before she was stopped by He Qingjian's personal secretary at the stairs. He politely said, "Miss Gu, please wait a moment." Gunyanji's heart sank. She knew that Hua Xiaoheng's guess was correct. Gunyanji slowly looked up at He Qingjian's personal secretary and said slowly, "What do you mean? Are you trying to restrict my personal freedom now?" He Qingjian's personal secretary pursed her lips and said slowly, "Miss Gu, how could we dare to restrict your personal freedom? But young master, his current condition is unknown. We also hope that you can stay here with him for a while. Perhaps he will recover faster." Gunyanji was so angry that she laughed. "If you don't let me go home, aren't you restricting my personal freedom? As for young master, his condition, I'm not a doctor. Will he recover faster? You should hurry up and find a good doctor to take a look at him instead of racking your brains to do evil things." He Qingjian's personal secretary couldn't help but have a headache. This little girl was really spoiled. If he didn't say it out loud, they would still be good friends. If she insisted on tearing down this layer of shameful cloth and causing a life-and-death struggle, she would only be the one suffering. "Miss Gu, this is General He's idea." He Qingjian's personal secretary reminded her softly, "General He is a man of his word. His only exception is young Master He. So you'd better pray that young Master He wakes up early so that you can go home." Gunyanji, holy sh*t. It was almost exactly the same as what Hua Xiaoheng had said. How much did this person know about He Qingjian and his subordinates? Gunyanji's mood suddenly improved. A smile slowly blossomed from the corners of her lips to the bottom of her eyes. She was like a begonia in spring, indescribably beautiful. He Qingjian's personal secretary was surprised to see that Gunyanji wasn't angry anymore. She even smiled at him good-naturedly. That smile was so beautiful. Gunyanji threw the Hermes red packet over her shoulder and smiled. "Okay, then I'll wait for young Master He to wake up soon. Speaking of which, young Master He has taken good care of me. It's only right for me to accompany him when he's in trouble." Without needing He Qingjian's personal secretary to continue persuading her, Gunyanji had already walked back on her own. Pushing open the door to He Jichu's suite, Gunyanji threw the Hermes red packet in her hand onto the sofa in the corner. It happened to land on top of Hua Xiaoheng's Soviet-made military coat. It looked like a tall man in a Soviet-made military coat was carrying a Hermes red packet. The contrast was so jarring that one couldn't help laughing. Gunyanji giggled and sat on the sofa in the living room. She took out her phone and played with it. In fact, she had secretly turned on her hacking program and hidden her phone on the internet to secretly contact Lu Jin. Hua Xiaoheng heard the sound outside the bedroom. He didn't need to look back to know that Gunyanji had been invited back again. He smiled faintly and said in a clear voice, "Am I right? Yes, you're the best. You know everything I'm thinking. You're so capable, can you get me out?" Gunyanji made a face at Hua Xiaoheng's back in the living room. Hua Xiaoheng? He really didn't have the ability to get Gunyanji out. Because he was afraid of hurting her, because he didn't want Gunyanji to be shot in front of him again. If they wanted to go back, He Qingjian could only let them go willingly. Hua Xiaoheng turned around and saw Gunyanji making a face. She was being naughty again. Hua Xiaoheng was angry and amused at the same time. This girl was indeed big-hearted. She probably inherited this from Lu Jin. Hua Xiaoheng walked out of the bedroom and quietly closed the door inside. He sat down next to Gunyanji and whispered in her ear, "Although I can't get you out, I can stay here with you until He Qingjian agrees to let you go." Although his voice was disguised because it was soft, his original voice still had a trace of magnetism, slowly plucking at her heartstrings. The hot breath brushed past her ears like a feather, but also like a flame. Her emotions surged as if she was running on the warm grass in spring, or sunbathing under the hot summer sun. That feeling, how could it be so sour and refreshing? The tip of Gu Nianji's ears turned red. In Huo Xiaoheng's eyes, it was like a piece of lychee jelly that had just been formed. It was soft and trembling, emitting an unwitting temptation that invited people to pick it. Huo Xiaoheng's breathing suddenly became heavy, and his Adam's apple bobbed up and down. He wished he could stick out the tip of his tongue and lick the tender tip of her ear in front of him. Gu Nianji felt the change in Huo Xiaoheng's breathing and subconsciously turned her head. The tender tip of her ear seemed to be sent to Huo Xiaoheng's mouth, and it quickly swept past his lips. Although it was so short that it could be ignored, to the two of them, it was like a bolt of lightning that had not appeared in a long time, tearing through the calm sky. Huo Xiaoheng could hardly control himself. His heart was beating unimaginably fast. He even wondered if Gu Nianji could already hear his heartbeat. How could Gu Nianji have the energy to listen to Huo Xiaoheng's heartbeat? Her own five senses were in a state of stagnation. Waves of numbness quickly spread from the tip of her ears to her entire body, and even her bones went limp. The two of them sat on the sofa like two statues. The beautiful girl was like a pearl as she stared ahead. The man beside her lowered his head to her ear, as if he was whispering, but also as if he was making love. This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1669, I'll be here with you. The double monthly votes for May would be on the 7th day of the month. Dear friends, hurry up and vote. Don't keep the monthly votes until the end of the month, at 8 p.m. the second update. Moi big shots, little angels. Chapter 1681. The two people who were truly in love sat so close that even their skin was attracted to each other. Every cell in his body was clamoring to get closer and closer. Huo Xiaoheng felt that all the training he had received in resisting seduction in his life had been wasted. His strong willpower was like a building that was about to collapse, on the verge of collapse. Gu Nianji also had a hard time enduring it. She had never received that kind of training. Right now she was a person made of snow. If the hot flames from Huo Xiaoheng's side got any closer, she would melt into water and collapse. The room was unprecedentedly quiet. Both of them seemed to be able to hear the sound of time. Minutes and seconds passed by like a white steed. They thought that it had been a long time, like an eternity, but in reality, it had only been a few minutes when there was a soft click from the door of the suite. Huo Xiaoheng suddenly came to his senses and moved to the side. He smiled faintly and said, Miss Gu, have you agreed to my pursuit? Gu Nianji also came to her senses after a bucket of cold water was poured over her head. She gritted her teeth secretly and thought to herself that this person could still pretend. The thrill just now seemed like she was just imagining things. However, on second thought, in this environment, it was impossible even if she wanted to acknowledge him. That would only put the two of them in an even more dangerous environment. She couldn't blame Huo Xiaoheng. She was the one who had lost her composure. Gu Nianji reflected on herself, and her face quickly turned as cold as ice. She turned her head and frowned. Who agreed to it? Don't add to the drama. There's no such thing. I'm here to see young Master He. If you're here to see young Master He too, sit over there. Don't squeeze on the sofa with me. It'll make people think that your motives are impure. As soon as she finished speaking, the door was pushed open. He Qingjian's personal secretary stood at the door and raised an eyebrow. The anti-chemical defense team just sent a message. They didn't find anything in that ward for the time being. Our chief wants to invite Mr. Peter over to talk. Gu Nianji calmed down and turned to look at Huo Xiaoheng teasingly. Mr. Peter, your idea isn't good. Think about it again and give General He more ideas. She made an okay gesture with her hand. Her eyes curved, and her smile was even more dazzling than a begonia in spring. Huo Xiaoheng looked away with difficulty. He also wanted to keep his distance from Gu Nianji for the time being. He had almost failed just now. I'll go take a look, but I can't help much. I don't know much about this area, he said politely as he stood up. His tall frame blocked the lights in the living room and cast a shadow on Gu Nianji, completely covering her. In a place where he couldn't see, Gu Nianji quietly stretched out her hand and clenched it into a fist, as though she wanted to grab the shadow. How she wished she could become Huo Xiaoheng's shadow. That way she could be like his shadow and follow him wherever he went. She wouldn't be separated from him, nor would she disappear. However, he wouldn't have to worry about taking care of her either. That way no one would be able to separate them. Unfortunately, this was only a fantasy. Huo Xiaoheng followed He Qingjian's personal secretary out and closed the door. Gu Nianji glanced at the door blankly, then quickly lowered her head to look at her phone screen. She had lost consciousness just now, so she didn't even know what message she had sent. On the other end of the phone, Lu Jin? He sent a series of question marks. Gu Nianji smiled and happily sent a message to Lu Jin. Something happened just now. I was distracted. Lu Jin breathed a sigh of relief and quickly replied, Then when will you be back? Gu Nianji, her fingers flew as she replied, I'll be able to go home when young master he wakes up. Lu Jin was instantly angry. What if he doesn't wake up? Then wouldn't you never be able to go home? That old man He Qingjian is going too far. Lu Jin was very sensitive when it came to matters regarding his daughter. He didn't have the typical symptoms of a patient with severe interpersonal disorder at all. Gu Nianji's sweet smile turned into a bitter one. She thought for a moment and tried to change the topic. But young master He's situation is really strange. I looked at the surveillance video in that ward. There was nothing unusual, but he suddenly fainted. Lu Jin was so angry that he slammed the table. He shouted indignantly, He Jichu fainted and He Qingjian wanted to keep my daughter there. Wasn't he planning to let my daughter continue making medicine? Unfortunately, there was no one else in the room and no one heard him speak. He was the only one who vented his anger. Lu Jin was angry for a while, but he swallowed his anger and sent a message to Gu Nianji. No one can faint for no reason. If he's unconscious, there must be a reason. Have they found out what the reason is? According to Lu Jin's nature, he wouldn't care even if He Jichu died in front of him. He had treated He Jichu because, on one hand, he didn't want to hurt Qin Suwen because of the loss of her son. On the other hand, it was because he was very interested in the treatment method that Qin Yaoguang had proposed. It had aroused his great interest in scientific research, and that was why he had devoted himself to it. If He Qingjian had used this method at the time, Lu Jin would have rather been shot than saved. He was stubborn. When he lost his temper, even the most powerful tension machine wouldn't be able to pull him back, let alone 10 cows. But now that his precious daughter was in someone else's hands, if he didn't care, it would be his precious daughter who would be hurt. That was his sore spot, his sore spot. Gu Nianji didn't hear Lu Jin's angry voice, but Lu Jin replied after a while. She knew that Lu Jin must be angry. Who wouldn't be angry when He Qingjian did this? But she couldn't resist. Seeing that Lu Jin had replied, Gu Nianji quickly said, It's because we haven't found out the reason that I find it strange. Mr. Peter is also here. According to his observation, it wasn't affected by drugs, but it might have something to do with airborne transmission. I was wondering if it was a bacterial virus or something. They can all be transmitted through the air. General, he sent the chemical defense team to the ward to collect evidence, but they just received news that they didn't find anything. In other words, they didn't collect any residual information about viruses and bacteria. Gu Nianji replied to many messages in one go and waited anxiously for Lu Jin's reply. The first thing Lu Jin thought of was bacteria and viruses. Although these things were small, they were pervasive and could cause many unimaginable consequences. However, Gu Nianji said that He Qingjian had already sent the chemical defense team to investigate, but there was still no result. If it wasn't bacteria and viruses, then what was it? Lu Jin thought about it for a while and replied, What about that surveillance video? Can I take a look at it? Gu Nianji nodded repeatedly. Yes, yes, yes. She shared her cloud account with Lu Jin so that he could see the surveillance video. The surveillance video was the surveillance video that came with the ward. The resolution wasn't high. She could only see the rough figures and movements of a few people. Their expressions were slightly blurry, just like the images from the color television sets with low resolution in the last century. Gu Nianji couldn't help but complain. The Qin Corporation's private hospital claims to be rich and imposing. They charge so much, but the surveillance is so crude. They aren't even willing to install a high-resolution camera. Lu Jin scoffed and replied, The Qin Corporation's private hospital is essentially a for-profit hospital. Their goal is not to treat patients and save people, but to make a profit. Treating patients and saving people is their way of making a profit. Don't think that just because it has the word hospital in its name, it will have the heart of a doctor. For private hospitals, that doesn't exist. They only recognize money. Gu Nianji hissed and shook her head. She didn't know much about this, so it wasn't convenient for her to comment. Lu Jin was going to look at the surveillance video, so he replied to Gu Nianji, I'll go see what's going on with that video. Don't worry. Even if He Jichu doesn't wake up, I'll let you go home. After Lu Jin finished speaking, he cut off Gu Nianji's secret connection. He turned on his mainframe, which was comparable to the Wuxia Empire's central control system, and began to analyze the surveillance video. Since it wasn't bacteria or viruses, then it had to be something else. There were many mediums that could be transmitted through the air, and each of them could cause He Jichu to fall unconscious. but at the same time the other two people were safe and sound. That was interesting. No, that wasn't right. Gu Nianji had said that Qin Yaoguang had also fainted later. A little later than He Zhichu. What was the reason? Lu Jin slowed down the surveillance video like Gu Nianji and watched it frame by frame. However, he was also analyzing a large amount of data at the same time. Gu Nianji was using He Zhichu's laptop. Although that laptop had excellent performance, it couldn't compare to Lu Jin's extremely powerful supercomputer. This was a computer that Lu Jin had built himself. Even the chip had been designed by himself. It was 100,000 ET hashes ahead of the most powerful computer on the market. SIC the distance of the minor chip. However, even with such a powerful computer analysis system, it took him nearly 4 hours to find a clue. This was today's second update, Chapter 1670, Reverse Scale and 7 inches. May's double monthly votes would be on the 7th day of the month. Dear friends, hurry up and vote. Don't keep the monthly votes until the end of the month, moi little angels. Chapter 1682. In Lu Jin's private laboratory, the entire wall was filled with computer screens of all sizes. Over the years, the equipment in this private laboratory had followed him wherever he went. He sat in front of the console in the middle of the room, his fingers still typing on the keyboard. He continuously refined the resolution of the surveillance video, and at the same time, analyzed all kinds of physical data. Because Gu Nianji had said that He Qingjian's anti-chemical defense team had not found any remnants of bacteria or viruses, Lu Jin did not waste time investigating the chemical aspect. Instead, he directly analyzed it from the physical aspect. The reason for He Zhichu's sudden coma was not because he had a relapse of his old illness, nor was it because he had been infected by an unknown bacteria or virus. That left only a physical blow. Lu Jin's data analysis was also based on physics. The electromagnetic and optical reactions in the video as well as the length, width and height of the physical world plus time, could be analyzed in 4 dimensions. Such a complicated analysis would take a long time. 4 hours later, the data analysis of the entire video was completed. On the big green screen in the studio, the Snow White ward was no longer a ward in reality, but a ward that had been structured by data. The entire scene was like a 3-dimensional analytical geometry drawn by a computer. The 3-dimensional structure of the ward could not hide from his analysis, and the truth of all the conspiracies was revealed. After Gu Nianji sent the shared cloud account to Lu Jin, she couldn't take it anymore and fell asleep on the sofa in the living room outside He Zhichu's bedroom. When she woke up, Hua Xiaoheng had already returned. He was sitting beside her and gently covering her with his coat. Gu Nianji opened her eyes in the darkness and quietly looked at him. Her eyes were black and white, and her pupils were extremely black. The whites of her eyes were even a little blue, and they were as bright as the most transparent glass. Her eyes, which had just woken up, were still filled with laziness and trance that she couldn't hide in time. She blinked and slowly reached out to touch Hua Xiaoheng's cheek. She murmured, "Major General Hua, is that you? I had a dream again. I dreamed that I was home with you." Hua Xiaoheng pursed his lips and covered her with his coat. He said lightly, "I'm sorry you've mistaken me for someone else." Gu Nianji. Sitting up on the sofa, she pushed Hua Xiaoheng's coat away and curled up in a corner of the sofa to sulk. Hua Xiaoheng didn't comfort her. He continued to hold his coat and sat quietly on the other end of the sofa. He stared at the wall-mounted TV on the opposite wall. At that moment Lu Jin called. It was a video call invitation. Gu Nianji looked down, and her heart almost jumped out of her throat. She quickly ended the call. Before she could send a text message, Lu Jin's text message had already arrived. "Answer the phone. Don't be afraid. I've already hacked into the He family's security system." Gu Nianji, Yu Yu's mood immediately improved. Lu Jin had already hacked into the He family's security system. What was there for her to be afraid of? Gu Nianji happily accepted the video call and called out coquettishly, "Dad." Lu Jin was elated when he heard this. He quickly said as if he was presenting a treasure, "Go and lock the door of this room. Daddy will show you the tricks." Gu Nianji quickly agreed and got up to lock the door to He Zhichu's living room. As Gu Nianji walked towards the sofa, she pointed out, "Dad, Mr. Peter is also in this room. Can you see him?" If Lu Jin had hacked into the He family's security system, then Lu Jin should be able to see everything in this room. Actually, the surveillance cameras in He Zhichu's room were not connected to the security system of the He family's mansion. They were in his own hands. This time, because he had suddenly fallen unconscious, He Qingjian had connected the security surveillance system of the mansion to Hijichu's suite so that he could check on Hijichu's condition at any time. Although Gu Nianji and Hua Xiaoheng were alone in this room, they didn't dare to say a word because of this reason. Lu Jin had said that he had hacked into the He family's security system, which meant that the entire He family's security system was under his control. He could show whatever he wanted to the people watching the surveillance. If they didn't come to check it themselves, they wouldn't know what was going on in this room. Therefore, Lu Jin asked Gu Nianji to lock the door so that she could have some undisturbed time. It was 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning when everyone was the most sleepy. Most people probably wouldn't disturb them at this time. Lu Jin said resentfully, "I know he's here. Fortunately, he still has the rules. If he dares to take advantage of you while you're asleep, I can make him a eunuch immediately." Gu Nianji, Lu Jin's voice was very loud. Gu Nianji held her phone and the sound leaked through her fingers. Hua Xiaoheng's face darkened, and he frowned unhappily. Gu Nianji was secretly pleased and deliberately said, "Dad, you're exaggerating. You're just monitoring. How can you climb over the network cable?" Lu Jin was amused and said, "For a physicist, if he wants to, anything in this world can become a deadly weapon. Although I'm far away, as long as I can monitor this room, I can transform the appliances in this room into automatic attack weapons." Gu Nianji could only use a underscore to express her ignorance and admiration. She didn't understand and she couldn't afford to offend him. Hua Xiaoheng saw that the father and daughter were getting further and further away from each other. He looked at his watch without batting an eyelid and said, "We don't have much time." Gu Nianji quickly stopped him and said, "Dad, what kind of trick are you going to do for me?" Lu Jin also returned to the topic at hand and said, "Just you wait." As he spoke, he seemed to be doing something on the other side. Then the wall-mounted TV on the wall opposite Hijichu's living room suddenly turned on by itself. After the blue screen, a ward appeared on the TV. It was old Master Qin's ward. It was also the ward Hijichu had been in for 24 hours. Gu Nianji's eyes widened and she said in surprise, "Dad, is this the surveillance video?" "Yes," Lu Jin said happily. "Now we're going to start conjuring." Soon, the ward on the TV screen gradually began to turn translucent and illusory. Lines appeared on the screen and all kinds of data were labeled. Gu Nianji looked at the ward model built by three-dimensional analytic geometry on the TV, and her beautiful lips parted into a circle. "See? This ward is actually not the rectangular shape that you can see with the naked eye, but a convex shape." Lu Jin's voice came from the stereo Bluetooth speaker in the room. Gu Nianji could see clearly that the two extra parts below the convex shape were tightly covered by two long postmodern gray leather sofas. There were also green plants placed behind the sofa. The green broad-leaved plants as tall as a person not only eased the tension in the ward, but also took the focus of the view. If Lu Jin hadn't analyzed the ward's physical data, even if he had the architectural design of the entire building, he might not have been able to discover the small wings on both sides. Now this ward was no longer a building in their eyes, but a model built from data. The mouse in his hand slid casually across the ward model. Every time he clicked on a spot, not only could he see the length, width, and height of the spot in the ward, as well as the data of the building materials, but he could even see the global coordinates of the spot. When Hua Xiaoheng saw Lu Jin's system, he immediately reacted and sat up straight. What kind of system was this? This was AF*King Super Accurate NMD. NMD, in international politics, was national. Missile defense was a ballistic missile defense and counterattack system developed by the United States military. This system used to be very popular, but it later declined because the accuracy of the real-time coordinate processing required by this system was too difficult to achieve. The military believed that it had invested too much and the results were not high, so the United States had already installed it themselves. But what if the difficulty of real-time coordinate processing could be broken through? What if this system was installed on a satellite? "Did you modify this based on NMD?" Hua Xiaoheng finally asked. His voice was suppressed to prevent the excitement in his heart from leaking out. Lu Jin's smug voice rang in their ears. "Give me a video. I can decode the global coordinates." "What's NMD?" Gu Nianji was confused. She looked at Hua Xiaoheng, who was obviously suppressing his emotions, and then at Lu Jin's smug face on the phone. Her gaze wandered between the two of them, and she felt that there was something between them that she didn't understand. Lu Jin smiled and said, "I'm much better than that half-baked NMD. If you use a system like mine, even if it's a missile from a neighboring country, the satellite system will be able to decode the missile's location the moment it's launched from the base. At the same time, it will calculate the missile's trajectory. Our own interceptor missiles will be able to take off unhurriedly and intercept the missile outside the country. Gu Nianji finally understood. What Xiaoheng had already said, such precise positioning will also be a great help to the precision strikes of drones and guided missiles. Uncle Lu, have you ever considered? No, I haven't considered it. Lu Jin rejected him flatly. NMD, drones, and precision guidance were not within his consideration. Because of all these years of escape, in order to protect himself, he needed a monitoring system that could monitor his opponents and locate their coordinates in real time. Therefore, he designed and built such a system himself, and it was connected to the mainframe he had designed. He could keep track of the other party's movements at any time. This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1671, Daddy Will Do Tricks for You. It was the penultimate day of the double monthly votes in May. Everyone hurry up and cast your monthly votes. Don't keep your monthly votes until the end of the month, 8 o'clock in the evening, the second update. Moi moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1683. The main purpose of my system is to accurately locate the target. There's no other intention, Lu Jin said firmly. Wu Xiaoheng still wanted to persuade him. Actually, I think there's still more room for exploration in Uncle's system. For example, if we cooperate with the global satellite navigation system, he wanted to use the globally supported Nanda satellite system to attract Lu Jin's interest. Lu Jin chuckled and raised his eyebrows proudly. If necessary, I can hack into any satellite system in the world and use the global satellite resources to monitor any target in all directions without any blind spots. Hu Xiaoheng? He was actually trying to get something without risking anything. Hu Xiaoheng had never admired anyone before, but in front of Lu Jin, he felt that he had to make an exception. She thought about it, then whispered, "My father doesn't need to do this. He doesn't have the ambition to dominate the world. It's fine as long as he can have a lab like this and immerse himself in the world of technology and data." Lu Jin nodded repeatedly. That's right. Nianji is right. That's what I think. Let me tell you, it's all thanks to this system that I discovered the abnormal fluctuations in the magnetic field energy. I also discovered that He Qingjian had actually sent people to kidnap Nianji. Therefore, he had fought a devastating energy battle with He Qingjian. Although there was no smoke, it was extremely destructive. And now, he was using this advanced system that could monitor any target in the world to analyze an inconspicuous ward. Not only was everything in the ward analyzed by him into data, but even the flow of air in the ward could not hide from him. Nianji, I'm going to perform a magic trick for you now. Watch carefully, Lu Jin said as he focused his attention on the data analysis of the video. The problem with this ward is indeed related to the air. But it's not bacteria and viruses. That's been ruled out. Then what does it have to do with? We can start with the central air conditioning system of the entire building. Under normal circumstances, a sealed ward has a central air conditioning system. The air flow should be a self-circulation system. But look. Lu Jin's mouse pointed at a set of data points. This set of data doesn't show such a simple airflow. You can see it very clearly from here. Among the airflow data, there is a set of data that continuously flows towards the corner of the wall where He Zhichu is sitting. In other words, this is not a simple flow of air. There is another kind of energy in it. Lu Jin clicked on the air data again with the mouse and instructed the system to conduct further analysis. Soon, the computer system made a precise calculation and came to a conclusion. Look, this is the result of the computer system's analysis. The other type of energy that follows the flow of air is none other than sound waves. To be precise, it's a group of infrasound waves below 20 Hz. Infrasonic wave weapon. Wu Xiaoheng's eyes flashed. So the culprit was the infrasonic wave weapon. There are people using this kind of weapon here? He recalled that there had also been incidents of sound weapons injuring people in the other world. It was during the process of Gu Nianji being kidnapped and missing. Lu Jin didn't know about the other world, so he continued to explain. For sound waves, the frequency that the human ear can hear is between 20 Hz and 20,000 Hz. Sound waves below 20 Hz are called infrasound, and sound waves above 20,000 Hz are called ultrasound. Infrasonic wave weapon, as the name implies, is a weapon that uses infrasound to kill enemies. Because different organs in the human body have different frequencies of pulsation, this kind of pulsation happens to be in the same frequency range as infrasound. In other words, it is in the range of less than 20 Hz. Therefore, infrasound of different frequencies will resonate with different organs in the human body. Infrasonic wave weapons use this to attack the enemy. Infrasonic wave weapons can cause mental and physical damage to the human body. Mild cases include nausea, vomiting, and dizziness. Serious cases can cause mental disorders, pain all over the body, and even death from internal organs rupturing. Ijichu's condition was that an infrasonic wave weapon of a specific frequency was continuously attacking him. However, because the other party didn't find the resonance frequency accurately, it took a full 24 hours to finally cause physical damage to his body. If I were to control this infrasonic wave weapon, I would only need 2 seconds to paralyze anyone within the attack range of the infrasonic wave weapon. Lu Jin seemed to shake his head regretfully. The infrasonic wave weapon they used can be said to be very crude. Gu Nianji's mouth opened even wider, but before she could speak, Hua Xiaoheng had already frowned and asked, "But the weakness of infrasonic wave weapons is also very obvious. May I ask how they managed to get around this weakness?" "What weakness?" Gu Nianji quickly asked. "Sounds very powerful. It's practically a siege without a drop of blood." "Yes, it's indeed a siege without a drop of blood, but not necessarily a siege." Hua Xiaoheng sat leisurely on the sofa, crossed his legs and said calmly, "Infrasonic wave weapons have a very big weakness, and that is that they attack indiscriminately. In other words, they don't distinguish between friend and foe at all, and it's very easy for both sides to suffer. This kind of kill 1,000 enemies and hurt 1,000 oneself weapon was not that meaningful in war." Lu Jin nodded approvingly and said, "Indeed. Not only does infrasonic wave weapon attack indiscriminately, but it also has a special range of attack. If it's too far away, it won't be of much use." "Yes, infrasonic wave weapons require the instrument that emits infrasonic waves to be not far from the target. Then where is the source of their infrasonic wave weapons?" Hua Xiaoheng was obviously more interested in military technology. Lu Jin excitedly pointed at the 2 small rectangles below the convex shape and drew a line with the mouse. He said, "Look at what's inside." He double-clicked the mouse and asked the system to analyze the 2 small rectangular rooms hidden on both sides of the ward. On the television screen, the 2 small rectangles that Lu Jin had drawn with the mouse were originally a whiteboard, showing that there was nothing there. However, Lu Jin entered another series of instructions and said with a smile, "Dad's trick is continuing." At that moment, the 2 small rectangles that had originally been empty suddenly seemed to have been dispelled by magic, revealing the hidden treasure underneath. In the 2 small rectangles that were originally empty, 2 instruments in the shape of large rollers gradually appeared. In front of the roller was an upright black gauze amplifier. It was a circular amplifier. Lu Jin pointed at the 2 instruments that had been revealed and said, "These are the culprits that emitted infrasonic waves." It emitted infrasonic waves at Hijichu for at least 24 hours before Hijichu fainted. Gu Nianji was very surprised. Why did it take so long? Then young master, he must have suffered a lot. "I don't know why it took so long," Lu Jin said with a smile. "It depends on how the people over there try to remedy it." Gu Nianji looked at the data modeling of the ward displayed on the television and suddenly asked, "Since you said that infrasonic wave weapons attack indiscriminately, why is young master he the only one unconscious?" Qin Yaoguang managed to hold on for a while. "As for old Master Qin, he's completely normal." Lu Jin looked at her with a smile and praised, "That's a better question. What? I'll show you the reason now." At that moment, Lu Jin moved the mouse to old Master Qin, who was lying under the oxygen mask on the hospital bed. Old Master Qin's oxygen mask was a real oxygen mask. It didn't just cover his nose but covered his entire body. Lu Jin moved the mouse to the oxygen mask and said, "Look at the data." The data was as small as a grain of rice. It was densely packed on the oxygen mask and it was impossible to see what it meant at all. Lu Jin pointed at the data and said, "Take a closer look at this oxygen mask." Gu Nianji shook her head. "I don't understand it. Please explain." Hua Xiaoheng observed the oxygen mask carefully and suddenly said, "This oxygen mask isn't simple. It has 2 layers and is a vacuum." Lu Jin smiled and said, "That's easy to explain. Because the biggest weakness of infrasonic wave weapons isn't that they attack indiscriminately, but that it's too easy to intercept them. As long as a vacuum zone is established around the target, infrasonic waves won't be able to hurt him." Gu Nianji understood and quickly said, "Then this double-layered full-body oxygen mask actually creates a vacuum zone in the middle, so the infrasonic wave attack works on him." Lu Jin looked at the oxygen mask on old Master Qin's hospital bed on the screen and pursed his lips. He said lazily, "This old guy really cherishes his life. That oxygen mask on him isn't an ordinary oxygen mask." Not only can this thing provide oxygen, but it can also shield against all external energy, including but not limited to electricity, magnetic energy, light energy, and sound waves. This was today's second update, Chapter 1672, Daddy Will Do Tricks for You Too. It was the penultimate day of the double monthly votes in May. Dear friends, hurry up and cast your monthly votes. Don't keep your monthly votes until the end of the month, at 8 p.m. the second update. P.S. When I'm done with my work, I'll make up for the monthly votes, rewards, and chief updates. Don't worry, dear friends. Moi little angels. Chapter 1684. That powerful? Gunyanji was shocked. She leaned forward and asked eagerly, what about Qin Yaoguang? She didn't seem to have any protection, did she? Did the infrasound weapons attack her as well? Lu Jin laughed and used the mouse to click on a green figure on the data model of the ward. This is Qin Yaoguang, right? On the TV screen, the man was wearing a green surgical gown, a green surgical cap, and a large surgical mask. Gunyanji nodded. Yes, this is Qin Yaoguang. She just followed someone into the operating room, so she's dressed like this. Lu Jin clicked on the person's data and explained to Gunyanji, did you see the data on her surgical gown? Gunyanji, she saw it, but with so many numbers piled up together, she had no idea what they meant. This data shows that the surgical gown she's wearing is not made of ordinary materials. Lu Jin smiled and clicked on Qin Yaoguang's figure further. He said, my system can perform a three-dimensional image of the people in this video. 3D dialysis imaging? Gunyanji instinctively looked at Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng said, it's like going through security at the airport. They use X-rays to check if a passenger is carrying any dangerous goods. They can see through the person's clothes. Gunyanji was embarrassed. Sigh, should she cover his eyes? Lu Jin wouldn't be so unreliable as to expose his mother-in-law's 3D in front of his son-in-law, right? She opened her mouth and wanted to remind Hua Xiaoheng in fear, but she was worried that if she said it, Hua Xiaoheng would realize that she had seen through it. Based on Hua Xiaoheng's way of doing things, if he sensed danger, he would immediately stay away from her. Gunyanji didn't want to separate from Hua Xiaoheng, so she could only pretend to be deaf and mute. She couldn't bear to look away. However, Lu Jin's voice rang out in the room. Yes, it's just like going through security at the airport. My system is more sophisticated, and the three-dimensional dialysis image should be clearer, almost like a real human model. But look, Hua Xiaoheng exclaimed softly. Gunyanji's expression was conflicted as she thought to herself, what do you mean by, huh? Does mother-in-law have a great figure? Embarrassed, she couldn't help but glance at the TV screen. What was going on? There was no 3D dialysis imaging on the TV. Qin Yaoguang was still wearing the green surgical gown, a green surgical cap, and a big mask to cover herself up. Did Lu Jin suddenly think of this? Gunyanji was about to ask when Hua Xiaoheng spoke first. Why didn't Qin Yaoguang have a three-dimensional dialysis image? Lu Jin said, it's very simple. It's because my scanning system couldn't penetrate her surgical gown, the surgical cap, and the mask. So powerful. Your scanning system did not penetrate it, but what about the infrasonic wave weapon? Could it not penetrate? Gunyanji asked curiously. Lu Jin nodded and praised with a smile, Nyenji is so smart. That's how it is. Look at the material of her surgical gown, surgical cap, and mask. They are all nanograde, and just like her father's oxygen mask, they all have a vacuum layer. Gunyanji finally understood. She clenched her fists and said excitedly, the oxygen mask on old Mr. Qin's body is actually multifunctional. It can block infrasonic weapons, but that's just a coincidence. However, the only function of Qin Yaoguang's surgical gown was to block infrasound weapons. That doesn't make sense. Hua Xiaoheng smiled. This means that at least Qin Yaoguang knew about this infrasound weapon a long time ago. She's dead meat. Gunyanji clasped her palms together and beamed. As long as we tell General He this evidence, she'll definitely die a horrible death. If she dared to lay a hand on He Qingjian's son, she would suffer He Qingjian's wrath. Although Hua Xiaoheng agreed with Gunyanji, Qin Yaoguang was Gunyanji's biological mother after all. Although what Qin Yaoguang had done to Gunyanji was no longer worthy of being a mother, others didn't know. Gunyanji couldn't show such happy emotions in front of others. He coughed lightly and reminded Gunyanji, that's about General He. Don't be too agitated. She's your mother. Gunyanji rolled her eyes at him and said coldly, I'm sorry, I never acknowledged her as my mother from the beginning. Whether she lives or dies has nothing to do with me. Well said. It has nothing to do with you. Lu Jin couldn't help calling out to Gu Nianji. Gu Nianji laughed happily. As long as Lu Jin didn't care about Qin Yaoguang's life or death, Gu Nianji didn't have any psychological burden. She understood what Huo Xiaoheng meant. He was reminding her not to show such emotions in front of outsiders. It would make people who didn't know better think that she was cold-blooded and heartless for gloating over her biological mother's death. But she really didn't care. Huo Xiaoheng, however, he heard something else in Lu Jin's words and his brows furrowed slightly. Did Lu Jin know what he was talking about? Huo Xiaoheng's mind raced as he began to ask Lu Jin, Uncle Lu, Miss Gu doesn't admit that Dean Qin is her biological mother. You're a scientist, so it's not good for you to deny this, right? It's because I'm a scientist. Lu Jin was caught off guard and missed a sentence, but he quickly came to his senses. Holy sh*t. This KGB was so scary. Time to slip away. Lu Jin didn't want to video chat with them anymore. He was worried that he wouldn't be able to resist the KGB's interrogation, so he quickly said, that's the situation. Ijichu was attacked by an infrasonic weapon. Judging from his unconscious symptoms, the left side of his brain was attacked. If he were to rest in a pure vacuum for 12 hours, his symptoms should be greatly alleviated. He should wake up soon. I still have something to do. Come back early. With that, Lu Jin cut off the connection with Gu Nianji and turned off the video analysis on the TV. The TV screen, which had been flashing with countless green data, suddenly turned black, and the light in the room seemed to dim. Gu Nianji stared at the wall-mounted TV in shock and asked in confusion, What's wrong? Did something happen? Why did you hang up in such a hurry? She took out her phone and sent Lu Jin a text message. Lu Jin only replied with 2 words, busy? Be good. Gu Nianji, maybe he was really busy? Gu Nianji sighed and said, I'll go look for General He. Mr. Peter, you? Huo Xiaoheng pulled her back with a complicated look in his eyes. How are you going to look for General He? How are you going to tell him what happened just now? Are you going to say? He raised his chin at the TV to remind Gu Nianji not to expose Lu Jin's whereabouts. Gu Nianji rubbed her forehead and smiled bitterly. I almost forgot. I just wanted young Master He to get out of danger as soon as possible. It's not a big deal. Huo Xiaoheng asked her to sit down. Let's discuss how to tell General He. Gu Nianji nodded. Huo Xiaoheng glanced at the surveillance cameras in the room. He wasn't sure if Lu Jin, an unreliable person, was still in charge of the He family's surveillance system. If he wasn't, they were under the He family's surveillance again. Huo Xiaoheng took out his phone and sent Gu Nianji a text message. Let's talk like this. The surveillance is unstable. Gu Nianji instantly understood and replied. Let me think about how to tell General He. Her goal was to push the blame onto Qin Yaoguang, but this matter couldn't be avoided by old Master Qin and the Qin family. Gu Nianji turned on her phone and looked at the surveillance video she had stored in the cloud again. Suddenly, her eyes lit up and she quickly typed, I can tell General He that I found something wrong with that operating room. Ask him to send someone with me to the operating room. Huo Xiaoheng shook his head and replied to her. You want to bring someone to investigate the 2 infrasound emitters? I think those 2 machines have been removed a long time ago. Gu Nianji didn't believe him. But that ward has been sealed off by General He's people? How could they have the guts to do that? Huo Xiaoheng smiled and glanced at her lightly. He replied, If it were me, even if there was a company of soldiers in front of the door, I would still be able to remove those 2 machines. Gu Nianji. Alright, you're the best. Next. Huo Xiaoheng couldn't help rubbing her head and replied. Besides, Uncle Lu said that those 2 small rooms weren't actually in the ward, so even if General He sent people to seal off the ward, they didn't seal off the other 2 small rooms. So the Qin family should have removed the 2 machines from another exit long ago. If you don't believe me, you can bring someone to investigate. Gu Nianji thought about it, then stood up and replied, It doesn't matter. The monk can run but the temple can't. They've removed the equipment, but I don't believe they can seal off those 2 secret rooms. As long as I find those 2 secret rooms, won't I have the final say on what was in those secret rooms? Besides, General He is so suspicious. As long as he's given the slightest clue, he'll come up with a big show. What's more, 2 secret rooms suddenly appeared near the ward where his son had an accident. If he doesn't dig 3 feet into the ground of that Qin private hospital, I'll write my name upside down. Gu Nianji threw down those words valiantly and walked towards the door. Huo Xiaoheng quickly stood up. Wait for me, I'll go with you. Just say that I discovered it. Gu Nianji turned around and frowned at him. It was clearly me, How did you discover such a thing? Or Xiaoheng didn't even look at her. He picked up his coat. Only we, the KGB, are the most sensitive to secret rooms. Therefore, He Qingjin wouldn't think anything else if he said that it was Peter, the ace of the Far East, who had discovered it. Gu Nianji understood and her eyes darkened. Okay, then let's go find General He. This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1673, Daddy Will Show You Tricks, 3. It was the last day of the double monthly votes in May. Everyone hurry up and cast your monthly votes. Don't keep your monthly votes until the end of the month, at 8 p.m. the second update. Moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1685. Gu Nianji went to He Zhichu's bedroom to take out his laptop, then left He Zhichu's suite with Hua Xiaoheng. The guard standing at the door immediately stopped them and said, "May I ask where you two are going?" Gu Nianji looked at Hua Xiaoheng carefully and said to the guard, "This is Mr. Peter, the Deputy Chief Consul of the Soviet Union. We have something important to tell General He. It's related to young Master He's condition. Can you pass on a message?" The guard looked suspiciously at the charming Gu Nianji, then at the handsome and dignified Hua Xiaoheng. He thought for a moment and said, "I'll go ask someone." He asked another guard to stay here to watch Hua Xiaoheng and Gu Nianji while he went to look for He Qingjian's personal secretary. "Do you think the chief is free?" Miss Gu and Mr. Peter said they have something important to see the chief about. The guard saluted He Qingjian's personal secretary. He Qingjian's personal secretary said awkwardly, "The chief isn't in a good mood." He Qingjian had asked the anti-chemical defense team to search the ward carefully, but they didn't find anything. He was very depressed. Then maybe these two can distract the chief by talking? The guard respected He Qingjian from the bottom of his heart. He Qingjian's personal secretary's heart skipped a beat and he felt that it made sense. "Okay, I'll go make a call first." As he spoke, he took out his phone and dialed the landline in He Qingjian's study. He Qingjian sat in the study without turning on the lights. Only the dark night could hide his emotions. He looked at He Zhichu, who was still unconscious and motionless on the surveillance screen, and tears involuntarily flowed down his cheeks. He Zhichu was the only son Qin Suwen had left for him, the only bloodline, and the only trace Qin Suwen had left in this world. Was he going to lose it? How could he have the face to see Suwen after he died? He Qingjian closed his eyes and let the tears flow. At that moment, the landline in the study rang. He didn't want to answer the phone, but the phone kept ringing. It looked like it wouldn't give up until he answered the phone. The phone in the study usually only rang when there was something important. He Qingjian took a deep breath and wiped away his tears. He picked up the phone receiver and said lightly, "Hello." The personal secretary on the other end of the phone quietly wiped the sweat off his forehead and said with a smile, "Chief, Miss Gu and Mr. Peter said that they have something important to report. It's related to young Master He." He Qingjian was stunned. She said that? He looked at the surveillance screen and pursed his lips when he saw He Zhichu's motionless expression. "Okay, take them to the small meeting room." "I'll be there right away," He Qingjian said. He put down the phone and got up to go to the small meeting room again. He had met the ace of the Far East, Peter, here yesterday. He hadn't expected the ace of the Far East to come again today. He was really chasing after Gu Nianji? He Qingjian snorted in his heart. His face had already returned to normal. With a warm smile, he entered the small conference room. Gu Nianji and Hua Xiaoheng were already seated in the small conference room. He Qingjian walked in with steady steps and the two of them stood up together. "General He." Gu Nianji greeted him first. "Are you all right?" She noticed that He Qingjian's eyes were a little red, but she couldn't believe that He Qingjian had cried. He Qingjian smiled. I'm fine. Sit." Gu Nianji and Hua Xiaoheng sat down together after He Qingjian sat down. He Qingjian looked at the couple who seemed to have a tacit understanding of each other, and then thought of his son, He Zhichu, who was unconscious on the hospital bed. He Qingjian felt a little uncomfortable. His expression darkened and he looked at his watch. "What do you want? Tell me quickly, I only have 5 minutes." Gu Nianji placed He Zhichu's laptop in front of He Qingjian and said, "General He, I had nothing to do when I was with young Master He, so I watched the surveillance video over and over again. Mr. Peter happened to come to see young Master He. After watching the video a few times, he found something interesting." Hua Xiaoheng nodded slightly and said, "I watched the video without your permission. I hope you don't take offense." "It's fine." He Qingjian waved his hand. "Go ahead." Hua Xiaoheng picked up the mouse and pointed at the location of the 2 secret rooms on the video. He said to He Qingjian, General He, I watched the video a few times and realized that although the people inside don't look like there's anything wrong with them, this ward is a little interesting. The ward is a little interesting? He Qingjin narrowed his eyes. You mean? Yes, look here. Xiaoheng pointed at the green plants behind the sofa in the corner. There seem to be 2 rooms behind this, but I can't tell from the outside. He Qingjin sat up straight and stared at the computer screen for a long time. You mean there's a secret room here? But I can't tell? Xiaoheng smiled. Trust me, I've seen this kind of room during special training. There's definitely something wrong with both sides. If you don't believe me, you can send someone to the 2 places I circled and smash them to see if there's a secret room there. He Qingjin rubbed his chin with his hand and said in confusion, even if there is, what does that mean? That means a lot. Why are there secret rooms on both sides of old Mr. Qin's ward? What's in this secret room? Gu Nianji asked. General He, don't you want to know? Maybe young Master He's illness has something to do with these 2 secret rooms? He Qingjin thought about it silently for a while, and his expression gradually changed. He stood up and said to Gu Nianji and Xiaoheng, I want to go take a look for myself. Do you want to come with me? Gu Nianji quickly said, I'd love to. Xiaoheng had no choice but to stand up as well. He smiled and said, if possible, I also want to go and broaden my horizons to see if my judgment is correct. He Qingjin couldn't help glaring at him. What do you mean? Didn't you discover this? Why do you look so uncertain? Gu Nianji quickly tried to smooth things over. She smiled and said, Mr. Peter is from the KGB. The KGB's reasoning is basically based on guessing, so I'm not too sure. The corners of Xiaoheng's mouth twitched imperceptibly. He thought to himself, what KGB's reasoning is basically based on guessing? If the KGB found out about this, they would probably be so angry that they would yell and challenge Gu Nianji to a one-on-one duel. However, he didn't say anything. He maintained an awkward but polite smile and stood quietly beside Gu Nianji. He Qingjin snorted. Let's go. If there's nothing, you'll have to take responsibility. Gu Nianji was nervous. She took 2 quick steps forward and followed He Qingjin. She whispered, General He, if there's nothing, you can't blame Mr. Peter, right? He was kind enough to help us. We can't just contribute money and effort, right? The corners of He Qingjin's mouth twitched. What do you mean contribute money and effort? How did he contribute money? I was just giving an example. Gu Nianji blinked her large eyes, which had a built-in contact lens effect, with an innocent expression on her face. He Qingjin's mind went blank for a moment. Through Gu Nianji's expression, he actually thought of Qin Suwen. Every time he bickered with Qin Suwen and Qin Suwen deliberately acted shamelessly, she would show this expression, and then he would unconditionally surrender. All the reasons he had ever spoken in his life were only in front of Qin Suwen. He Qingjin silently looked away and didn't say a word. He brought 2 platoons of people to the Qin Corporation's private hospital again. Previously, he had placed a platoon of people here to guard the ward, and now he had brought 2 platoons of people to demolish the house. The people from the Qin Corporation's private hospital didn't dare to say anything. As the executive director of the Qin Corporation's private hospital, Wen Shuyi rushed over when she received the news. General He, what are you doing? Her face darkened as she walked up with her legal team. Not only did she bring the Qin Corporation's huge legal team today, but she also informed all the major new media outlets to give them big news. Therefore, behind them, not only were there legal teams, but there were also many new media practitioners. Gu Nianji's eyes were sharp, and she immediately saw Xie Qingying standing in the front row. There were 2 people carrying cameras beside her, and they were filming this way. This was today's second update, Chapter 1674, Reasoning basically relies on guessing. It was the last day of the double monthly votes in May. Everyone hurry up and vote. Don't keep the monthly votes until the end of the month. Today was also Monday. I forgot to ask for recommendation votes in the morning. Everyone, I forgot. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1686. Xie Qingying was wearing a smoky gray dress. Her long hair was tied into a bun at the back of her head. She did not have too many accessories, and the makeup on her face was very light and elegant. Just like how she usually appeared on camera in the news, she showed a magnanimous and intellectual style. She had a professional smile on her face. It wasn't overly enthusiastic, but it wasn't cold either. However, she still maintained a certain sense of distance. Because the biggest characteristic of news was that it had to be fair, it had to always maintain an objective perspective and mentality. Therefore, people who were too emotional were not suitable to be reporters, but more suitable to be actors. Gu Nianji hurriedly glanced at her face, then at the lawyers in front of the group of reporters, and finally at Wen Shuyi's face. She had only caught a glimpse of Wen Shuyi and did not pay much attention to her appearance. Now that Xie Qingying was here, and Wen Shuyi was wearing a smoky gray dress suit that was similar to Xie Qingying's, Gu Nianji suddenly realized something interesting. She realized that Wen Shuyi's appearance actually resembled Xie Qingying. In the past, the two of them were completely different. However, Xie Qingying was the same as Gu Nianji. She was tall, but Xie Qingying was more voluptuous and steady. Therefore, although Wen Shuyi's face looked a little like Xie Qingying's, there was still a difference in her petite figure. Gu Nianji's eyes darted back and forth across Wen Shuyi's face. She wasn't worried at all that Wen Shuyi would look at her. Wen Shuyi did feel Gu Nianji's gaze. That kind of blatant provocation and contempt made her very uncomfortable, but her identity was different now. She was no longer a nobody like Gu Nianji. She was now the executive director of the Qin Corporation's private hospital group. She had already relied on her own ability to rise to the top of the country. She had enough confidence and strength to ignore Gu Nianji's childlike quarreling tactics. Wen Shuyi walked forward calmly and stopped 3 meters away from He Qingjian. This was the warning line drawn by He Qingjian's orderlies. Unrelated people could not cross this distance to He Qingjian's side. He Qingjian glanced at her indifferently and said, "The military has received a report that there are secret rooms hidden on both sides of your hospital ward. It's speculated that it has something to do with Major General He's serious injury, so we have to thoroughly investigate your building." Wen Shuyi smiled and said gently, "You can demolish someone's house just because you report them? General He, when did you disregard the law? If Lawyer Qin was still alive and saw you like this, who knows how sad she would be." It had to be said that Wen Shuyi's understanding of the He family's father and son was extraordinary. Perhaps even Qin Yaoguang didn't know them as well as she did. Just as she pulled Qin Suwen out, a hint of hesitation flashed across He Qingjian's eyes. However, he still maintained his genial appearance. His eyelids were half closed and no one could see his mood swings. But he said nothing. Although Gu Nianji didn't know why, she sensed that He Qingjian's breath seemed to have stopped. She immediately stepped forward and retorted, "Dean Wen must have become unfamiliar with the law after becoming a dean. Our general He brought people to investigate the hospital thoroughly to find the secret room. How is that ignoring the law?" Wen Shuyi ignored Gu Nianji and continued to smile warmly. She stared at He Qingjian without moving. He Qingjian was quiet for a moment, then chuckled and said, "Lawyer Gu is now my lawyer. It's not up to Dean Wen to decide whether I'm ignoring the law or not." He turned his gaze to Gu Nianji and looked at her gently. He encouraged her, "Lawyer Gu, it's up to you." Gu Nianji was overjoyed. She thought that she had a good reason to do so. The smile on her face grew even wider. She was like a begonia blooming in May under the morning light. She was incomparably beautiful. Wen Shuyi's expression changed, but she quickly calmed down. She nodded and said, "Okay, then may I ask why you came to our private house to demolish it? Is there a demolition order from the court?" He Qingjian's personal secretary immediately handed a translucent folder to Gu Nianji. Gu Nianji only needed to look at the small labels on the folder to understand what was there. She held up the folder and said calmly, "Dean Wen, don't forget that this ward is where young Master He was attacked. It's already the crime scene that the police have delineated. Now that we, as the plaintiffs, are coming to the crime scene to look for evidence of the crime, are you going to stop us? Or do you have a guilty conscience? There's something shameful on both sides of this ward, so you won't let us in at all costs? Secondly, which eye of yours saw that we were going to demolish the house? Did you see that we were holding shovels in our hands or picks? Or chainsaws and electric awls?" Gu Nianji waved her hand behind her. He Qingjian had just arrived at the door of the ward with 2 platoons of soldiers and had yet to start looking for the secret room, so Gu Nianji seized the loophole in Wen Shuyi's words and rebutted her. Wen Shuyi pursed her lips and said seriously, "I'm just reminding you that this is a private house. Even if it's a crime scene, it's still the property of the Qin Private Hospital Group. It's not a public asset, nor is it a state-owned asset. Please respect our private property rights." Gu Nianji sneered and said, "The suspect doesn't have personal freedom. Similarly, the crime scene doesn't have exclusive private property rights until the case is closed. Have you forgotten about that?" Gu Nianji kept saying that this was a crime scene, and Wen Shuyi was furious. However, He Qingjian had indeed called the police and said that He Zhichu had been attacked here. The police had also filed a case. Although the people guarding and investigating here were not from the police, but from the military, they had all the procedures. It didn't seem right to say that they had broken the law. Wen Shuyi secretly regretted coming earlier. It would have been better to wait for He Qingjian and the others to tear down the house before appearing. However, on second thought, if they had come too late and the other party had found the 2 secret rooms, therefore it was better for her to come earlier. Wen Shuyi's expression softened slightly. She said, "Okay, this ward is indeed a crime scene delineated by the police. Please limit your activities to this ward. Other places are not crime scenes delineated by the police. We still have exclusive private property rights." Gu Nianji nodded and looked behind Wen Shuyi. She smiled and said, "But Director Wen, it's one thing for you to bring your own team of lawyers, but why did you call your friends from the media?" The group of new media practitioners were now like they were on steroids. They were filming like crazy and preparing to publish exclusive news. The expression on Wen Shuyi's face was very intriguing. She said, "We are citizens and General He is an official. Since ancient times, citizens have not fought with officials. We can't win even if we want to, so we can only ask our friends in the media to help us report this matter fairly and let public opinion supervise the government's actions." Gu Nianji stretched out a thin white finger and shook it. She spoke quickly and anxiously, "Director Wen, you keep saying that the government is persecuting you? But Major General He suffered a fate worse than death in your territory. Tell me who is the one who persecuted who? Also, what we are doing today is not the government's actions but a military case. You have also been in the military before and the military has military laws. Cases related to soldiers must be handled according to military laws. Director Wen, are you old and forgetful or are you pretending to be confused?" Wen Shuyi hated Gu Nianji's habit of talking about age. She said coldly, "Anyway, a higher official can oppress people. Of course you can say whatever you want now." Gu Nianji's face also darkened. She said solemnly, "Director Wen, you are going back on your word. If you want to talk about the law, we will talk about the law with you. But when we talk about the law, you say that our higher official can oppress people. Please forgive me for being blunt, but if we really wanted to oppress people with a higher official, would you still have the chance to stand here and talk to us?" Gu Nianji's words made Wen Shuyi sound like a 3-year-old naughty child. Her face instantly flushed red, and she almost flew into a rage out of humiliation. At the same time, the new media practitioners had already begun to upload all kinds of videos and news to the internet. Many of them had been bribed by Wen Shuyi. With a little tampering with the angle of the video and the way the news was written, they could immediately stir up the emotions of the readers. #military chief He forcibly demolished the Qin Corporation's private hospital. #The 2 leaders of the Qin Corporation's private hospital are in prison, and the beautiful director can't hold on alone. #lawyer Gu Shiji's tongue is full of lies and bullying people. This series of topics immediately became a trending topic. Gu Nianji was still confronting Wen Shuyi, but He Qingjian's personal secretary had already received the news on the internet. He couldn't help frowning. He secretly sent the news to Gu Nianji. Gu Nianji felt her phone vibrate, so she took it out and quickly glanced at it. "Ha, friends from the media, you are really fast." Gu Nianji raised an eyebrow and stared at the group of new media practitioners. She said calmly, "Any new media that falsifies information online to fan the flames, wait for my lawyer's letter. I'm a person who doesn't go to court. Once I do, I won't stop until I make you go bankrupt." For this kind of media infringement case, the biggest punishment was financial punishment, especially the punitive clause, which worked every time. Gu Nianji said that most of the new media practitioners began to consider whether they should get involved in this mess or not. A small number of people were Wen Shuyi's diehard fans, and they immediately shouted, "It's illegal for you to threaten us journalists. We journalists have immunity." They were right, but Gu Nianji said forcefully, "The law doesn't protect fake news. If you falsify information, you will still be sued." Xie Qingying said calmly, "Lawyer Gu, the media should be left to the media to handle. I'll start a live broadcast now." As she spoke, she began to speak confidently to the camera. Xie Corporation News Report. Today we broadcast a piece of breaking news. We received an invitation from Director Wen, saying that they were being suppressed by an unknown force in the government. They hoped that the media would uphold justice for them. But when we arrived at the scene, we found that the situation here was somewhat different from what Director Wen had said. The ancients said that if you listen to both sides, you will be enlightened. If you listen to one side, you will be darkened. Let's listen to both sides. Dear viewers, let's first interview the lawyer representing the unknown force in the government, Gu Nianji. As she spoke, Xie Qingying walked in front of Gu Nianji and handed the recording microphone to her. Lawyer Gu, may I ask why you came to the Qin Corporation's private hospital? Gu Nianji looked at Xie Qingying and saw that she was slightly encouraging. Her heart skipped a beat. This was an ally. Gu Nianji immediately frowned and said anxiously, a few days ago, Major General, he was attacked by an unknown force here. He is still unconscious, but there is nothing unusual from the surveillance video. Later we received a report that there was a secret room in this ward. It might have something to do with Major General he being attacked in the ward. So there's a secret room? Can you point out to the audience which direction the secret chamber is? Xie Qingying's live broadcast was the one with the most fans in the new media. Moreover, she was on a live broadcast and it quickly became a craze on the internet. The number of people watching the live broadcast rose from hundreds of thousands to millions, and it was approaching the 10 million mark. The topic that had just been trending on Weibo was immediately ignored. It hung there alone. It was comical and ridiculous. Gu Nianji calmed down and walked forward to the location of the secret room on the left. She pointed at the green plants behind the sofa in the corner and said, the location mentioned in the report should be here. When Shuyi's pupils suddenly constricted, and even her heart seemed to stop beating. She quickly walked over and said unhappily, what are you doing? Xie Qingying turned around in time and said seriously, Director Wen, are you going to stop us from investigating the truth with our audience? This is the first update of the day, Chapter 1675, Enemy and Allies. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. Thank you for your monthly votes during the double period. When I'm done with my work, I'll start adding updates. At 8 p.m. the second update. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1687. When Shuyi looked at Xie Qingying. She hadn't expected her to help Gu Nianji. She had clearly investigated that Xie Qingying had a bad attitude towards Gu Nianji because she was in love with He Jichu. She had even had a public conflict with her. Had she been tricked? When Shuyi's gaze gradually turned cold, but her demeanor remained the same. She said lightly, I just want to remind you that the so-called crime scene is only this ward. You have no right to harass other places. Director, when we're just looking for the secret room. As long as we find the secret room, it will be an extension of the crime scene, so we can investigate thoroughly, Gu Nianji replied. Her voice wasn't loud. Her voice was gentle, but every word was clear. It was very soothing to the ears. The audience watching the live stream hadn't seen Gu Nianji's face yet. They only heard her voice and people immediately started to comment. Lawyer Gu has a nice voice. My ears are getting pregnant. Damn. I feel like I'm turning gay. Lawyer Gu, I want to have your babies. Give birth to my ass. Lawyer Gu can give birth to babies herself. Lawyer Gu, let's have babies together. What a lunatic. Xie Qingying glanced at the comments on the screen and almost laughed out loud. When Shuyi saw Xie Qingying laughing, and the corners of her mouth twitched in dissatisfaction. What if we can't find the secret room? Gu Nianji snorted and drawled, if we can't find it, then we'll still be at this crime scene. It's none of your business. When Shuyi, her expression was still indifferent. She turned around and walked towards the door as she said, since you guys don't want to give up, then do whatever you want. Just remember not to break the law. Gu Nianji shrugged and asked Xie Qingying, Miss Xie, are you still going to follow the live stream? Xie Qingying nodded vigorously. Of course. This is the professional ethics of us journalists. Discover the truth, confirm the truth and spread the truth. Gu Nianji's impression of her improved a little. Although the two of them had some disagreements before, it would be more difficult for Xie Qingying to step in than for Gu Nianji to use the law to fight against the new media. Even if they could win the lawsuit, the influence of public opinion wouldn't be so easy to disperse. Indeed, as Xie Qingying had said, it was best to use the media's methods to solve the problem. Gu Nianji turned around and walked behind the plants to touch the wall. She remembered that Lu Jin had shown her the location of the secret chamber. It was here. It looked like a rectangular ward, but in fact, a wall was added on both sides of the back, which turned the protruding ward into a rectangular ward. She roughly estimated the location of the green plants and turned around to wave at He Qingjian's personal secretary. Can you send someone to break this wall for me? He Qingjian's personal secretary looked at her speechlessly for a while. She waved her hand and called for the most powerful engineer under her command. She said, go take a look and see what's behind that wall. The soldier walked over. He looked ordinary and didn't even have a gun. But when he reached the wall, he suddenly pulled out a flashlight-like object from his waist and stuck it on the wall. Xie Qingying asked curiously, "May I ask what are you using to probe?" The engineer replied without turning his head, "High magnetic energy wall detector." Gu Nianji. Xie Qingying was also confused. She picked up her phone and checked it. She said to the live camera, "The wall detector that can be bought on the market can detect metal objects, cables and plastic pipes in the concrete. It can also detect the thickness of the wall." That's a little interesting. The high magnetic wall detector used by the engineers must be even more powerful. Xie Qingying watched with interest as the engineers probed with Gu Nianji. Occasionally she asked if she wanted to show her face on the live broadcast, but Gu Nianji declined with a smile. After a few minutes, the engineer turned around and said affirmatively, "Behind the wall is empty. There should be a room about 10 square meters in size." TSK, that's not small. Gu Nianji nodded in approval. She pointed in the opposite direction and asked, "What about over there?" "It's in the same position." When He Chengjian heard that there was indeed a secret chamber, his face darkened slightly. His jaw was tightly pursed and one could see his square jaw. He was tense and ready to attack. He had always been amiable in front of outsiders, but at this moment he couldn't help but turn cold. He Chengjian's personal secretary immediately ordered, "Smash it." When Shuyi's eyelids twitched and she looked at Gu Nianji in disbelief. How did she know the location of these two secret chambers? When Shuyi didn't believe that someone had reported her. It was just like when someone posted on the internet asking about my best friend, my friend, and my neighbor. It was actually all her own doing. She also thought that the person who had reported it was either Gu Nianji or... When Shuyi shifted her gaze to Deputy Chief Consul of the Soviet Union, Peter Hua Xiaoheng, who was standing beside Gu Nianji. This person looked exactly like Hua Xiaoheng over there, so he should be his counterpart. She didn't expect him to fall in love with Gu Nianji. A hint of bitterness flowed through Wen Shuyi's heart. It was extremely light, like the small footprints of a sparrow on the white snow in winter. After a while, it would be covered by the continuous snow. However, those dense thoughts were like the footprints of a sparrow on the snow. They were deeply suppressed in the bottom of her heart and couldn't be erased. She had worked so hard for the person she loved. However, Gu Nianji was able to make several men fall in love with her so effortlessly. What a top-notch green tea bitch. When Shuyi looked down on Gu Nianji from the bottom of her heart. She was only arrogant because she was beautiful and had a bit of eloquence. She really didn't even know how she died. Gu Nianji was actually getting along well with Major General Hua's counterpart, Peter. Did her fiancé know? When Shuyi's eyes flashed slightly. She stood at the door and looked at them calmly with her arms crossed. At that moment, another engineer came over and pulled out the universal engineer shovel from behind his back. He aimed at the structural lines drawn by the previous engineer and swung the shovel at the weakest point. The number of viewers watching the live broadcast had already exceeded the 10 million mark and was even approaching 20 million. This was a record-breaking number of viewers in the history of the live broadcast on this side. Everyone held their breaths and nervously waited for the secret chamber to appear. They didn't even spam the bullet screen, afraid that they would miss a single scene. Clang. The sharpest part of the shovel was directly embedded into the wall and stuck. He Qingjian's personal secretary saw that there was a chance, so he immediately waved his hand and sent 3 more engineers up. They all took out small engineer shovels. There was strength in numbers, and after a few moves there was a loud bang. The wall in front of them collapsed along the weakest part of the structure, revealing a bright room behind it. However, at a glance the room was empty. There was nothing in it. Gu Nianji's eyes sparkled as she looked at the secret chamber. She clapped her hands excitedly. "Oh my! There really is a secret chamber." As she spoke, the opposite wall was also knocked down by a few engineers. A symmetrical room appeared. It was also very bright and empty. When Shuyi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She shook her head and said, "You call this a secret chamber? How can an empty room with nothing be called a secret chamber?" This was the second update of the day, Chapter 1676, Secret Chamber. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1688. Gu Nianji's gaze swept over Wen Shuyi's face. She smiled and immediately said, "Then Director Wen, do you think there should be something in the secret room? But this place is empty. Where did the things go? They couldn't have grown legs and flown away, could they?" When Shuyi's smile froze and she quickly said, "Don't change the topic. This isn't a secret room at all. Where did the things come from?" What I mean is, according to Director Wen, the secret room should be a place to hide things, right? Gu Nianji turned on the court questioning mode again. Wen Shuyi frowned. I already said this isn't a secret room. I'm just confirming what you mean. The secret room should be a place to hide things. You just have to answer yes or no. Wen Shuyi was about to deny it, but Xie Qingying had already silently pointed the live broadcast camera at her. The screen was completely blocked by the dense barrage of bullet comments. Wen Shuyi calmed down and said calmly, of course. Otherwise, why would we need a secret room? But this really isn't a secret room. Gu Nianji walked in slowly and stood in the middle of the room. She turned around and faced the sofa in the corner in front of her. She said, Major General, he stayed on the sofa in the corner in front of us for almost 24 hours. Yi Qingjian's expression grew darker and darker. He put his hands behind his back and rubbed his thumbs against each other subconsciously. He thought to himself, there must be something here, but before they came or even earlier, they had already moved it away. At the thought of this, Yi Qingjian reached out and knocked on the shoulder of his personal secretary a few times. It seemed like he was just patting him on the shoulder, but in fact, he had already sent a series of instructions in modified Morse code. Seal off the hospital entrance. Only enter, not leave. Yi Qingjian's personal secretary understood and quietly sent a message to his men outside, asking them to set up a blockade at the hospital entrance and back door. On the other side, Gu Nianji walked around the secret room a few more times and said, This is also a hospital room. May I ask, Director Wen, are there any surveillance cameras here? Wen Shuyi smiled and said, This is just an empty room, so there are no surveillance cameras installed. Is that so? Gu Nianji stopped in front of Wen Shuyi and said calmly, Are you sure? Wen Shuyi nodded heavily and said confidently, I'm sure. This is just an empty room, there's no need to install surveillance cameras. In other words, whatever happened here would be left unnoticed. Dean Wen is amazing. Gu Nianji praised her and gave her a thumbs up. May I ask how long you've been the executive director of the Qin Corporation's private hospital? About 10 days. Wen Shuyi stopped smiling. She felt that something was wrong again. Gu Nianji clapped her hands lightly and asked in surprise, Then how many hospitals like this are there in the Qin private group? Wen Shuyi's heart sank and she pursed her lips tightly. The more she spoke, the more mistakes she made. How could she have forgotten about this? Dean Wen doesn't know? Gu Nianji took another step forward until she was almost standing in front of Wen Shuyi. She was tall and looked down at Wen Shuyi. Director Wen, if you don't tell me, I'll take it that you don't know. Wen Shuyi opened her mouth, but in the end she bit the bullet and said, Many. There are about 78 hospitals like this in the country. So, how many of these buildings are there among the 78 hospitals? Wen Shuyi, and how many rooms like this are there in such a building? Gu Nianji stretched out her arms and turned around freely. Even Director Wen can't tell? Then how can Director Wen be so sure that there are no surveillance cameras in this room? Gu Nianji stopped in her tracks and raised her voice. Wen Shuyi was a little flustered and exasperated. She suppressed her discomfort and clenched her fists. Because this room is Old Master Qin's ward. It's different from other wards, so I know very well. I know it's not monitored. Can't that do it? Sure, why not? Gu Nianji smiled. Director Wen has finally admitted that this room is part of Old Master Qin's ward. That means that this room is also a crime scene. You can't use private property as an excuse to refuse our test. I request to check the electricity consumption of this room in the past 10 days. If this room is really just an empty room, then its electricity consumption should be negligible. Gu Nianji remembered that Lu Jin had said that infrasound emitting sources required a lot of energy, which was electricity. If it was just an empty room, then the electricity meter definitely wouldn't show any abnormalities. But in reality, there had once been a high-power infrasound emitting source here. It had been working for 24 hours straight. The electricity consumption. The blood drained from Wen Shuyi's face. How is it? Director Wen, don't tell me that this room doesn't have an electricity meter, right? Gu Nianji put a hand on Wen Shuyi's shoulder and smiled infuriatingly. Wen Shuyi was furious. She pushed Gu Nianji's hand away and said coldly, I don't know if there's an electricity meter or not. You'll have to ask the electrician about that. Gu Nianji quickly turned to Yi Qingjian's personal secretary and said, Did you hear that? Director Wen agreed to let us find an electrician to test the electricity consumption of this room. Yi Qingjian's eyes lit up. Even he couldn't help cheering for Gu Nianji. He had wanted to ignore everything and search the entire hospital. Although he could find clues that way, it would still give others a bad impression. It was only natural for Gu Nianji to start with the electricity consumption of this room. He Qingjian's personal secretary was overjoyed and quickly said, "We have plenty of electricians. Get to know the world's #1 engineering unit." He quickly waved his hand and called the two most powerful electrical engineering experts in the engineering unit. He said, "Did you hear what Lawyer Gu said just now? Can you find out the electricity consumption of this room for the past 10 days? The two electrical experts quickly said, "Yes, sir. We just need to check the direction of the power lines and we'll know where the electricity meter is. Then hurry up and check." He Qingjian's personal secretary turned around and gave Gu Nianji a thumbs up. He smiled so widely that his teeth could not be seen. What's the point of crushing them with brute force? Crushing them with IQ is the most fatal. After saying that, he deliberately glanced at Wen Shuyi contemptuously. When Wen Shuyi had taken over Gu Nianji's position in the He family, this personal secretary had also been respectful to her. Now that she was sucking up to Gu Nianji, she actually looked down on her. Wen Shuyi closed her eyes. Her face was so red that it looked like it was about to drip blood. She forced herself to calm down and put her hands behind her back. Her right hand clasped her left wrist and she began to tap gently on her watch. She was also sending out the Morse code. Wen Shuyi used to be He Jichu's personal secretary, so she had also received special training in intelligence work. She was no stranger to these little tricks. Hua Xiaoheng's eyes flickered as he saw Wen Shuyi's arm tremble slightly. Was she sending a message? Hua Xiaoheng's fingers moved slightly, and a steel ball the size of a grain of rice shot out from between his fingers. It directly hit Wen Shuyi's right elbow joint. At the same time, He Qingjian also caught a glimpse of Wen Shuyi's arm movements. He also flicked a coin over and hit Wen Shuyi's left elbow joint. Both sides came at the same time. Wen Shuyi's left and right arms instantly felt as if they were crippled. She was in so much pain that she was on the verge of collapsing. Not only did she lose her balance, but her entire body was about to lose consciousness. She gritted her teeth and held back the scream that almost escaped her mouth. However, her right hand could no longer send out the Morse code. Just like her left hand, it hung limply by her side. She broke out in cold sweat. It was as if she had been fished out of a river. Her entire body was drenched in sweat. Fortunately, her assistant saw that the situation was not good and immediately supported her, so she did not fall to the ground. At this moment, the two electrical experts from the Corps of Engineers had already finished testing the wiring and successfully found the location of the electricity meter. Perhaps the person who designed these two secret rooms was too conceited. He had never thought that someone would forcefully break into the secret room from the outside, so the wires inside were all self-contained. There was also a super-functional electricity meter that was used as an electrical control device. Reporting Chief. The electricity meter shows that these two rooms have used a lot of electricity in the past 2 days. It shows that there was a large instrument running here. Without waiting for his personal secretary to speak, He Qingjian had already given the order calmly, "Lock down the entire hospital. Find the large instrument even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground. I want to see what kind of large instrument they used to attack Major General He." Out of the 3 platoons of troops surrounding the ward, 2 platoons were suddenly missing. Moreover, He Qingjian's personal secretary was giving orders to mobilize more manpower. If such a large instrument hadn't been moved away, then it must be in this hospital. However, to be on the safe side, He Qingjian's personal secretary also ordered the water, land and air transportation in the imperial capital to be sealed off. He also ordered them to search for the means of transportation that could transport large instruments. On the livestream, the audience was intoxicated by this turn of events and crazily cheered for Gu Nianji. Even a group of usually more reserved technical otakus began to crazily fan her. If men started to chase after stars, women would have nothing to do with it. Anyone who dared to say anything bad about Lawyer Gu would immediately be attacked by a group of people. They would be singled out on the internet and beaten up until the other party was completely obedient and no longer dared to say anything unpleasant about Gu Nianji on the internet. The fake reviewers that Wen Shuyi had bribed were not as strong as these real fans. Basically, the moment they opened their mouths they were judged by the fake reviewers. The technical otakus among the men could even follow the clues and find the IP address of the company that the fake reviewers belonged to and expose it online. Xie Qingying was also shocked and said repeatedly, "Lawyer Gu is too amazing. I've become a fan. Who would have thought that we could find so many clues in an empty room?" Let's hear Director Wen's opinion again. As Xie Qingying spoke, she actually brought her livestream camera to Wen Shuyi. Her smile turned cold. Director Wen, aren't you going to say a few words? What exactly happened in this room? Why is Major General He unconscious after staying here for 24 hours? How would I know? When Shuyi was in so much pain that her tongue was stuck out, and her words were unclear. Xie Qingying didn't know that when Shuyi's arms had almost been crippled. She thought that when Shuyi was feeling guilty, so she sneered and asked, Director Wen isn't saying anything. Are you regretting saying too much just now? If Director Wen knows what's going on, please be merciful and let Major General He go. Xie Qingying was basically pointing out that when Shuyi was the culprit, when Shuyi felt that it was ridiculous. Finally, the pain in her arms eased a little. She quickly said, How would I know what the reason is? I don't know why the electricity consumption here is so high either. I have to go back for a meeting and ask the management here. That's right. Ask if it was done by a temporary worker. Gu Nianji pouted disdainfully. What else can you do other than let a temporary worker take the blame for you? I didn't say it was done by a temporary worker. When Shuyi looked at Gu Nianji calmly. Lawyer Gu, don't accuse me of anything. I've only been the dean for more than 10 days, and you expect me to know everything. You even want me to know the reason for the electricity consumption of an empty room. That's too much for me. Did I? Gu Nianji pointed at herself. You were the one who personally confirmed that there was nothing here and that it was just an empty room. Then let's check the electricity consumption and see if this room is empty as you said. Isn't that logical? You checked and found out the problem. I don't know the reason, so it's logical for me to have a meeting to find out the reason. When Shuyi imitated Gu Nianji's tone of voice, she actually imitated her speed and tone of voice quite well. Gu Nianji smiled meaningfully and patted Wen Shuyi's shoulder again. Lawyer Wen really admires me. I know. You've been secretly practicing how to speak to me for a long time, haven't you? It's been hard on you. However, the most important thing to do is to have your own characteristics. Do you know what it means to learn to walk? Also, learn to draw a tiger but end up like a dog. When Shuyi's arm had just recovered a little when Gu Nianji patted it, she felt like it was about to be dislocated again, and cold sweat broke out on her forehead again. She said almost intermittently, I'm just mimicking your tone of voice and being sarcastic. Lawyer Gu, you can't even tell? I'm very satisfied with myself. I've never thought of mimicking others' words and actions. Gu Nianji sneered and crossed her arms. I only said that you were mimicking my words, but I didn't say that you were mimicking my actions. Don't tell me you're secretly mimicking my way of doing things? So I have to charge you. Otherwise you're a pirate. The corners of Wen Shuyi's mouth twitched. You're so shameless. You're getting better and better at talking to yourself. I've never learned from anyone. I just said, Lawyer Gu, don't use the same tactics you used in court against me. It's useless. Useless? Wasn't it quite useful just now? Gu Nianji said with a smile. She walked around Wen Shuyi and kept provoking her with words. In fact, she was stalling for time, hoping to find the two sources of infrasound emitters as soon as possible. When Shuyi knew what she meant, she was now in a difficult position. She secretly guessed that Gu Nianji must have an expert behind her. Otherwise, how could she have discovered the location of the secret room? Chapter 1689. However, even though these two secret chambers had existed for a long time, Wen Shuyi only found out about them recently. She quickly glanced at Gu Nianji and didn't dare to look in He Qingjian's direction. She drooped her eyelids and said weakly, All right, you guys can do whatever you want. I have to go back and have a meeting with the management. Why does this room use so much electricity? I'll give you an explanation. As she spoke, she turned around, gritted her teeth, endured the pain in her arms, and pretended to be fine as she walked towards the elevator. She brought a lot of people with her. In addition to the staff from the director's office, there were also members of the Qin Corporation's private hospital's legal team. In addition to the bodyguards she hired and the new media people she brought, they were almost as many as He Qingjian and the others. Gu Nianji was furious to see her leave just like that. She was sure that Wen Shuyi knew something. Even if she didn't know the whole truth, she at least knew part of it. However, the problem was that although Wen Shuyi often fell into the pit she dug as a lawyer, Wen Shuyi's ability to protect herself was extraordinary. Even if she had to cut off her tail to survive, she could still play on the edge of the law, so that people could not investigate her further. Last time, in the kidnapping case involving Gu Nianji, she had clearly interfered and deliberately misled He Zhichu. Because she insisted from the beginning to the end that she didn't know who she saw, the court couldn't convict her at all. However, He Zhichu was too concerned and had the misconception that Gu Xiangwen had taken Gu Nianji away. As long as she didn't mention Gu Nianji's name, there was no way to convict her of perjury. Also, because her parents voluntarily took all the blame, when Shuyi was able to get out of the lawsuit unscathed, Gu Nianji's expression darkened. She silently watched when Shuyi's silhouette as she walked towards the other end of the corridor. Seeing that most of the reporters had left, Xie Qingying couldn't stay alone. She briefly repeated the entire process to the live camera and finally said, "We've already begun to search the entire hospital for any large equipment that might exist. I wonder if you're interested in continuing to wait?" On the live stream, the word "wait" flashed across countless times, filling up the entire screen. Since the audience said that they would wait, Xie Qingying took the opportunity to stay. Ever since He Zhichu had gotten into trouble, she had been extremely anxious. However, the He family was not a place you could go just because you wanted to. Moreover, after He Zhichu's accident, He Qingjian had kept a close eye on the entire He family. The people who went in and out were all his trusted aides. The others, including the He family's servants, were all kept in the workers' room and could not move around freely. The He residence was currently under military control. It was not until when Shuyi sent someone to call her and tell her about the hospital that she rushed over. There wasn't much she could do. All she could do was help He Zhichu to the best of her abilities. But now that she was working, it wasn't appropriate for her to pry into his personal affairs. She hesitated and glanced at He Qingjian a few times. She really wanted to ask him personally about He Zhichu's situation. However, He Qingjian was surrounded by a lot of people. She couldn't get close to him at all, let alone ask him questions. As for inviting him to do a live broadcast with a live camera, that old man had eaten arsenic and was tired of living. Just as the entire ward fell into a strange silence, He Qingjian's personal secretary's walkie-talkie suddenly rang. He quickly picked it up and asked, "What's going on?" The soldiers' surprised voices came from the other end of the walkie-talkie. Reporting, Chief. A large piece of equipment was found in the CT room. After being tested by the equipment experts, it's a large infrasound emitter source. What? Infrasound emitter source. Infrasound weapon. He Qingjian's personal secretary shouted. So Major General, he was injured by an infrasound weapon. He Qingjian's entire body trembled and his brows furrowed tightly. His expression was filled with hostility, and there was a gloomy and heavy pressure that came before a storm. He strode towards the door. The orderlies beside him quickly followed, still surrounding him in the middle. Everyone moved too quickly. With so many people walking towards the door in unison, it was inevitable that they would crowd. Gu Nianji couldn't dodge in time and was almost squeezed to the ground by a few sturdy soldiers. She staggered back but still couldn't stop in time. Just as she was about to fall to the ground, a pair of strong arms reached out from behind and helped her up steadily. It was Hua Xiaoheng. Gu Nianji instantly felt all the strength in her body return. She took advantage of the situation to stand firm. She turned around and was about to say, "Thank you," when she saw Hua Xiaoheng suddenly walk past her. He bent forward and picked up something from the ground. Gu Nianji. At that moment, Gu Nianji wasn't sure if Hua Xiaoheng had discovered the thing on the ground mainly to help her up, or if he had helped her up to pick up the thing on the ground. She quickly lowered her eyes and retracted her hand. Her long eyelashes were like 2 rows of small fans, covering the rolling emotions in her eyes. Hua Xiaoheng casually supported her waist with one hand, and his other hand was open. In his palm lay the thing he had just picked up from the ground. The place near the door was where Wen Shui had been standing just now. Gu Nianji also glanced at it and was surprised to find a round coin lying in Hua Xiaoheng's palm. It looked yellow. It looked like a gold coin. Or maybe it was plated copper. Just as Gu Nianji was about to ask, she saw He Qingjian stride back. He looked around the ground at the door and looked up to see Hua Xiaoheng standing nearby. He opened his palm and there was a round coin in his palm. It was a golden coin. He Qingjian's face darkened. He suddenly reached out and snatched the round gold coin from Hua Xiaoheng's palm. "Thank you," he said stiffly, turned around and left again. Xie Qingying looked at Hua Xiaoheng curiously and chased after He Qingjian and the others. Her livestream audience was waiting for her to take them to see the infrasound emitter. Soon there were only a few people left in the ward. Other than Gu Nianji and Hua Xiaoheng, there were also a few orderlies from the He family who followed Gu Nianji. He Zhichu hadn't woken up yet, so He Qingjian wouldn't let Gu Nianji move freely. Gu Nianji also understood this, so she treated these orderlies as free bodyguards. She walked slowly to the elevator and asked Hua Xiaoheng softly, "Mr. Peter, is that General He's coin? It looks yellow and very shiny. It seems to be rubbed a lot." Hua Xiaoheng remembered that when he had hit Wen Shuyi's arm with the steel ball, he had seen He Qingjian attack from the corner of his eye. He nodded. It should be his. I saw him throw it out just now. Gun Yinji became more curious. Throw it out? The coin that he threw? But he had already thrown it away. Why did he come back to look for it? Especially at a critical juncture like this, is it worth it? Hua Xiaoheng was deep in thought. His fingers rubbed a round gold coin in his trouser pocket. He couldn't take it out in front of Gun Yinji. The moment he took it out, he would be exposed. Because the round gold coin in his trouser pocket was found in Gun Yinji's pocket all those years ago. When she came to their world at the age of 12, other than the clothes she was wearing, she only had a small backpack on her back and a doll in her hand. There was a photo in the small backpack with Gun Yinji's name and birthday written on it. There was also a very advanced engine blueprint in the backpack. In addition, there was a round gold coin in her pocket. The gold coin was exquisitely made. On the front was a heart formed by two hands together, and on the back was a set of numbers 1314. The set of numbers was held in the middle by a string of raised cursive English words below the edge. This string of cursive English words had been interpreted many times, but the alphabet experts in the other world still couldn't figure it out. Hua Xiaoheng's fingers swiped across the string of raised cursive English words. He didn't need to look to know that the string of cursive English words on the left was happy, calm, justice, and the string on the right was queen, supper, wonder. Hua Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat. He turned to ask an orderly who was following them, that coin just now belonged to General He? Does it have any special meaning? The orderly also saw He Qingjian personally coming back to look for the coin. He smiled and said, everyone knows it. Don't you know Mr. Peter? Hua Xiaoheng? He smiled calmly. I only came to your country this year, so I don't know much. Gun Yinji was also very interested. She quickly asked the orderly, so you know? Little brother, don't hide it anymore. Tell me quickly. The orderly was indeed young, but he wasn't young either. He was in his 20s, and his face turned red when Gun Yinji called him little brother. He scratched his head awkwardly and said embarrassedly, that's the gold coin that the chief specially minted for his wife. We all know about it. It was minted the year they got married, and only 11 were minted in total. Gun Yinji? She asked in disbelief. The wedding souvenir is actually a minted gold coin? Is it a real gold coin? Or is it just a commemorative coin? Of course it's a currency minted by the national mint that can be circulated. How could our chief use a commemorative coin to fool his wife? The orderly quickly spoke for He Qingjian. It's just that it's not publicly released. They were all collected by the chief and given to his wife as a betrothal gift. This was the first night watch of the day, chapter 1678, Wedding Souvenir. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. At 8 p.m. the second night watch. Moi, all big shots and little angels. Chapter 1690. Real currency minted by the national mint as a betrothal gift? TSK, now this is a big deal. Mr. Peter, if you want to propose to your sweetheart in the future, you can use it as a reference. Gun Yinji smiled and winked at Hua Xiaoheng. Her bright smile bloomed like a sea of flowers in May. Hua Xiaoheng's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. He curled the corners of his lips and smiled coldly and arrogantly. If you're willing to marry me, I can also go back to the Soviet Union Mint to think of a way. Did she get the wrong person? Was this a fake Hua Xiaoheng? How could Hua Xiao, who had principles and a bottom line, do something like this? But on second thought, Hua Xiaoheng was still talking about the Soviet Mint. It was obvious that he was still speaking as the ace of the Far East, Peter. Gun Yinji snorted appropriately. How can you bargain over something like this? It's obvious that you're being perfunctory and you're still saying that you're sincere? Is this your sincerity? Hua Xiaoheng smiled faintly and didn't reply. He had never thought of doing such a thing. All he could think about now was the 11 round gold coins. This was really wearing out iron shoes and fruitless searching, only to find it by chance without even looking for it. As expected, things that came from here could only be found after returning here. It took the language and cryptography experts of the opposite world several years to uncover the true meaning of those cursive English words. However, after Hua Xiaoheng found out that this was He Qingjian and Qin Suwen's wedding souvenir, he immediately understood. Happy, calm, justice. If they were put together with their initials, it would be HCJ. It should be He Qingjian's initials. Similarly, Queen, Supper, and Wonder were arranged in alphabetical order. They were QSW, the abbreviation of Qin Suwen's name. He Qingjian engraved their names under 1314. The meaning was really profound. Wu Xiaoheng's hands were still in his trouser pockets, his fingers rubbing the coin as he followed Gu Nianji expressionlessly into the elevator. Several batches of people had already gone down. Gu Nianji and the others were the last to go down. When she arrived at the hospital's CT room, Gu Nianji discovered that it was already packed with soldiers. Normal people couldn't get in at all. Gu Nianji wasn't an ordinary person. As soon as she arrived, the soldiers standing guard at the door immediately let them in. The people outside who couldn't squeeze in loudly complained, "Why can they go in but I can't?" "He's the chief's lawyer. What are you?" The soldier standing guard with a gun said with a fierce face. Although he didn't dare to point his gun at the crowded crowd, the deterrence was enough. When those people heard that it was He Qingjian's lawyer, they stopped shouting. However, they all craned their necks and tiptoed, wishing they could see what was going on inside through the crack in the door. The full name of CT is computed tomography in Chinese, meant computed tomography. Depending on the rays used in the scan, it could be called an X-ray scan or an ultrasound scan. Inside the CT room, the atmosphere was tense. Even the air was tense. The first thing Gu Nianji saw when she walked in was the CT machine that was as tall as a person. It looked like a silver-white donut, standing on a huge base in the middle of the room. In front of it was a reclining board the size of a single bed. During the CT scan, the patient lay on the long reclining board and was gradually sent into the circle in the middle of the donut, to be scanned. In other words, the CT machine itself was a transmitter. Now that it wasn't working, there was a large gauze disc in front of the donut. Gu Nianji looked around the CT room curiously. She didn't seem to see where the infrasound emitter was. He Qingjian was standing next to the CT machine, glaring at the CT machine's donut. Gu Nianji wondered if the infrasound emitter had been modified into this CT machine. Just as her imagination was running wild, He Qingjian ordered, "Smash it." "You can't smash it. This is medical equipment. Do you know how many people are waiting for it to save their lives?" A doctor in a white coat looked at He Qingjian angrily but didn't dare to say anything. "General He, you can't do this." He Qingjian turned a deaf ear. He didn't even need to look at him, let alone explain. A few engineers quickly walked over to the donut, with their tools and started working on the large gauze disc baffle in front of the donut. Gu Nianji's eyes lit up. This large gauze disc baffle was actually an amplifier for the infrasound emitter, right? She quickly walked over to the doctor who wanted to rush over and block the donut CT machine with her body and said, "Don't worry, wait for our chief to perform a magic trick for you." As she said magic trick, Gu Nianji couldn't help but think of Lu Jin and her heart warmed. A child with a father was indeed a treasure. The doctor watched for a while and saw that the engineers didn't dismantle the CT machine, but the large gauze disc baffle in front of it. He heaved a sigh of relief and muttered, "Do you dare to say one more word? Will it kill you to explain one more word?" Gu Nianji smiled and winked at him. "You have to understand what the leader means by his words." Not long after, a few engineers removed the large gauze disc baffle and proceeded to remove the huge base of the donut. They had already detected what was in the base, so they were familiar with removing it. They were even faster than removing the large gauze disc baffle. When he saw that there was a silver-gray cylindrical machine hidden in the base of the CT machine, the doctor was completely dumbfounded. How could this be? How could this be? Where did this come from? The doctor looked so pitiful that he didn't look like he was faking it at all. Gu Nianji guessed that he was unlucky to be the doctor in this CT room. Now that there was a problem in the CT room, he had to be responsible even if he wasn't responsible. This silver-gray cylindrical machine was the infrasound emitter, and the large gauze disc baffle was actually the amplifier for the infrasound emitter. Gu Nianji walked up to take a look and clicked her tongue. This is really amazing. Such a high-power infrasound emitter source. No wonder it uses so much electricity. He Qingjian stood where he was without moving, but the anger in his eyes was no longer hidden. It was this lousy thing that made his son's life worse than death. He reached out and pointed at the infrasound emitter and amplifier on the ground. He said in a low voice, "Look again. There should be two of them. Take this one away. The entire hospital is sealed." The medical staff standing next to him was shocked and quickly said, "General He, it's understandable that you sealed this CT room, but what about the patients if you seal the entire hospital? What if someone gets sick? What should we do?" Gu Nianji was eloquent and immediately played her role as a lawyer. "Is this the only hospital in the country? Will everyone die if they leave this hospital? The medical staff were stunned and didn't know what to say. Gu Nianji turned to He Qingjian's personal secretary. If the hospital is sealed, will the patients inside not be affected? He Qingjian's personal secretary quickly explained, of course the people inside won't be affected. It's just that the people outside can't come in and the people inside can't go out. It was like being confined. That would be like being an innocent bystander. Gu Nianji pondered for a moment and asked, will the hospital be opened after the investigation is over? He Qingjian replied to her directly, from the looks of it there isn't too much regulation of private hospitals but too little. This is a major issue that concerns the national economy and the people's livelihood. The Qin Corporation shouldn't be allowed to open so many private hospitals carelessly. I will propose to the Senate and the Cabinet to clean up and investigate the private hospitals in the country. Those that fail will be closed down and punished according to the law. At the same time, we will strengthen the regulation of private hospitals. We can't let this place become a place outside the law. This was in response to Wen Shuyi's repeated statement that private hospitals were private property and were sacred and inviolable. Gu Nianji clapped and cheered. I support General He. Since they want to open a private hospital to earn money, they have to be strictly regulated. Otherwise, don't open a private hospital. They can't say that they're saving the dying and helping the injured, while using private property as a shield to refuse supervision, so that they can commit crimes in private. Putting the lives of the people in the hands of this kind of private, unregulated hospital is irresponsible to the citizens. It's a dereliction of duty by the government. In the live broadcast, Gu Nianji's words were once again bombarded with comments from the technical otaku fans. Private hospitals were indeed like a place outside the law in this country. On the one hand, they weren't as strictly regulated as public hospitals. On the other hand, they had a large team of lawyers and security guards. The professional medical troublemakers, who showed off in front of public hospitals, were as obedient as their grandchildren in front of private hospitals. There were even some professional medical troublemakers, who took money from private hospitals and deliberately caused trouble in public hospitals. The Qin Corporation's private hospital was considered the best private hospital, but it had actually made such a big mistake. Xia Qingying immediately faced the live broadcast camera and said with a heavy heart, the Qin Corporation's private hospital even dared to plot against someone of Major General He's status. What about ordinary people like us? In their eyes we're just like grass, right? Do you still dare to come to the Qin Corporation's private hospital to see a doctor in the future? For the hospital industry, reputation was too important. With Xia Qingying's words, the reputation that the Qin Corporation's private hospital had built up for decades collapsed like an avalanche. All of a sudden, patients from the Qin Corporation's private hospital all over the country asked to be discharged, and those who were going to come to see the doctor changed their minds. At the same time, some patients began to file a class action lawsuit, demanding sky-high compensation from the Qin Corporation's private hospital. When Shuyi, who was in a meeting in the conference room, received one call after another from the person in charge of the subordinate hospital. Her expression gradually turned ugly. What's going on? Want compensation? Are we afraid of a lawsuit? We'll go against them in court. When Shuyi said coldly. This was the second update of the day, chapter 1679, Innocent in the Matter. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. Moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1691. The Qin Corporation's private hospital had been established for decades and had developed to the point where it now occupied half of the Wuxia Empire's hospital system. Naturally, it was wealthy. They had their own team of lawyers in the hospital system that could accompany them at any time to fight a lawsuit with ordinary citizens. Big organizations have plenty of time and money to waste, but how could ordinary people have so much time and money? Therefore, after consulting with lawyers, some of them chose to file a class action lawsuit to compete with the large corporations and consortiums. When Shuyi was not afraid of going to court. Not to mention the fact that she had graduated from a top law school in the United States and was qualified as a lawyer, she now had the backing of the entire Qin Corporation's private hospital group, so she had nothing to worry about. Moreover, a class action suit was perfect for breaking them down one by one. She was not worried at all. She was more worried about General He's anger and pressure. This was the trickiest part. She had lived with the He family for several years and knew how much General He valued He Jichu. Her expression was uncertain as she sat quietly in the conference room. The discussion of the hospital management echoed in her ears, but in her mind she was thinking about how to calm General He's anger. She sighed softly and could only beg Auntie Qin to save He Jichu. Wen Shuyi narrowed her eyes as she looked at these people. They had to give He Qingjian an explanation for this matter. Otherwise, if he got angry, they would be like eggs hitting a rock. Over the years, although Qin Yaoguang had saved He Jichu's life, the Qin family had not forced him to repay her kindness. Instead, they had become even more submissive to He Qingjian and had never done anything to harm the He family. Moreover, Qin Yaoguang's medical skills were indeed brilliant. The reputation of the Qin family's private hospital over the years had been accumulated by the doctors in the hospital treating patients and saving lives. He Qingjian saw that they were down to earth in running a hospital and could provide more medical resources for society, so he tacitly allowed them to use his power to develop and grow in China. But ever since Gu Nianji returned, the situation had changed. A trace of viciousness flashed through Wen Shuyi's eyes as she coldly said, "It's useless no matter how much you argue. Speak clearly, where did the infrasound emission come from in the hospital?" The people in the conference room looked at each other in dismay. After a moment of silence, they started talking again. "How would we know? We're just a subordinate hospital. It's none of our business when the headquarters transfer equipment and manpower here sometimes." "That's right. Who knows where these two infrasound emission sources came from?" Wen Shuyi smacked the table with her hand. "Don't try to fool me just because I'm young. I wanted to check the surveillance in that CT room, but you said that the surveillance was broken. Now you're telling me that you don't know where the source of the infrasound emission in the CT room is coming from." An elderly department director in the conference room listened for a while and hesitantly said, "Actually, 2 days ago when I was on the night shift, I went out for a walk in the middle of the night. I saw a few people using a car to pull a few large boxes out of the surgical building over there and into the CT room over here. I wanted to ask them about it, but when I saw that they had access cards to enter and exit the building, I thought that they were one of us, so I didn't say anything." Wen Shuyi's heart tightened and she quickly said, "Is there a surveillance camera at the entrance of this building? Let's see." She wanted to check the surveillance footage, but her secretary went out for a while. When she came back, she said awkwardly, "The surveillance footage at the entrance of the CT room is also broken." Wen Shuyi, what is the IT department in the hospital doing? The surveillance footage is just for show, isn't it? Wen Shuyi breathed a sigh of relief, but her temper flared up even more. She said harshly, "I don't care if you have surveillance footage or not. Someone has to take responsibility for this anyway. If we can't find out who did it, the person in charge will have to take responsibility." Gu Nianji said that she wanted to find a temporary worker to take the blame. Wen Shuyi felt disgusted just thinking about it. She wanted to show her that she wasn't the kind of incompetent leader who would find temporary workers to take responsibility for something. As soon as they heard that the person in charge would have to take responsibility, the conference room exploded again. This time, the hospital's management united to oppose Wen Shuyi, and they all objected to her taking responsibility. "If you don't take responsibility, who will?" Wen Shuyi sneered. "The company spent so much money to hire you, but you can't even do basic management. How dare you object? I'm telling you, if we can't find out who did it today, I can only hand over the people in charge." At that moment, someone pointed at the elderly department director and said, "He saw someone pulling the equipment during his night shift, but he didn't stop it or ask about it. I think he failed in his duty." Yes. It's him. It's him. Maybe he was the one who stole it. He conspired with someone. Now that they had found a scapegoat, everyone immediately shared a common hatred and pushed this honest man out to take the blame. The elderly department director was on the verge of tears, but how could he fight against so many people alone? Soon he was pressured by everyone to take responsibility. The corners of Wen Shuyi's lips curled up. She stood up and said to the management who was still arguing in the conference room, "You guys keep an eye on him. I'll go see General He." The conference room fell silent. The people sitting here were all the middle and upper management of this private hospital. However, in the entire Qing Corporation they were still not ranked, and they couldn't curry favor with someone like He Qingjian. Now that they saw that Wen Shuyi could actually talk to He Qingjian directly, they couldn't help but feel respect for her. Previously, they had thought that she had relied on currying favor with Qin Yaoguang to become the executive director. They were a little unconvinced, but now they looked at her in a different light. Wen Shuyi's gaze swept across these people's faces and she smiled imperceptibly. She had never known how to easily control people's hearts. After coming out of the conference room, Wen Shuyi walked to the elevator with her secretary and bodyguards. She wanted to see how He Qingjian was doing and see if there was anything that could be salvaged. At most, she would bring Auntie Qin out and say that she could help wake He Jichu up. When Shi knew very well that He Jichu's condition looked serious, but it was actually not fatal. She just felt a little regretful. Just a little more and He Jichu would have been hers. When they arrived at the elevator door opened, and the person who walked out was He Qingjian's personal secretary. He had a few guards with him and an arrest warrant in his hand. When he saw Wen Shui, his hand trembled and he showed her the arrest warrant. He said coldly, "Director Wen, shouldn't you explain why there is a secret room in this hospital? Why is there an infrasonic wave emitting source in the secret room? Why did you attack our Major General He with infrasonic weapons?" Wen Shui took a step back and said calmly, "We were just having a meeting. There are indeed loopholes in the hospital's management system. I don't know why there is an infrasonic wave emitting source in the hospital. But I've already asked the person in charge of this hospital to take full responsibility for this matter." "Really? Then we won't stand on ceremony. He has to come with us." He Qingjian's personal secretary gave Wen Shui a meaningful look. "Director Wen is really swift and decisive. You quickly found someone to take responsibility. The hospital is managed by the person in charge. Everyone has their own scope of management. If something happens within his scope of management, of course he has to take responsibility," Wen Shui said in a low voice and stepped aside. He Qingjian's personal secretary followed Wen Shui back to the conference room. "It's him. If you have any questions you can ask him." Wen Shui pointed at the person they had collectively pushed out to take the blame. When the person saw a group of ferocious soldiers rush in, his vision went black and he fainted on the ground. "Take him away." He Qingjian's personal secretary waved his hand and turned to Wen Shui. "Director Wen, this is just the beginning." He Qingjian's personal secretary took him away. Wen Shui looked at their backs and thought to herself that she had to hurry to see Auntie Qin and Old Master Qin. When she brought her people to the hospital gate, they were immediately stopped by armed soldiers. Wen Shui's secretary went forward and quietly handed a bank card to the soldier. She said softly, "This is the executive director of our headquarters. He's in a hurry to return to the headquarters for a meeting. Chief, can you let us out first?" The soldier blocked the bank card that the secretary handed over with his arm. With a click in his hand he loaded the rifle in his arms. Without saying a word, he tapped the butt of the rifle on a sign beside him. When Shui's secretary then saw the sign at the door, "Military Restricted Area. Trespassers will be killed without mercy." The secretary, "This is our hospital. When did it become a military restricted area?" When Shui's secretary was so anxious that her face and neck turned red. She still wanted to shout. When Shui frowned and said, "You've already found the thing and caught the person responsible. Why are you still sealing off our hospital?" The soldier looked ahead and held his gun horizontally in his hand. He ignored her. His duty was to stand guard, not to explain to others. The troops that He Qingjian had brought this time were his direct subordinates. They were the elites of the elites and they were only responsible to him. They were all cooler than him and never talked to people who had nothing to do with them. They pulled out their guns faster than they could speak. Just as the two sides were in a stalemate, a convoy drove over. When Shui glanced at them and saw that they were all military plates. The one in the middle was He Qingjian's bulletproof car. She recognized it. The convoy slowly stopped in front of the gate. A soldier pushed open the car door and ran to the soldiers standing guard. He said loudly, "The chief has instructed that this hospital will be taken over by the police system. Withdraw." There was a whole squad of soldiers standing guard. After they finished the handover, they lined up and left. They got into the military vehicle and surrounded He Qingjian's convoy. They left in a mighty manner. From beginning to end, when Shui didn't have a chance to talk to He Qingjian, much less ask about Qin Yaoguang's condition. Her eyes dimmed, and the expression on her face became even more determined. She still had a tough battle to fight. She couldn't back down. Qin Yaoguang and Old Master Qin had both been taken away by He Qingjian. If she wanted to see them, she still needed He Qingjian's special permission. Therefore, when Shui ordered someone to drive to the He residence. At this moment in He Qingjian's bulletproof car, Gu Nianji and Hua Xiaoheng were sitting side by side opposite him. Gu Nianji was giving He Qingjian an idea. "General He, since we know the reason for young Master He's accident, we can prescribe the right medicine to save young Master He." This was the first update of the day, chapter 1680, this is only the beginning. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. Moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1692. The damage of infrasonic weapons can vary. Yi Qingjian sighed. I still have to go back and discuss it with the doctor, the expert. Be careful. He still had to drag Qin Yaoguang out and force her to wake He Zhichu up. Because the best doctor in the military had already come to examine He Zhichu, and even he was helpless. Yi Qingjian knew that his last choice was Qin Yaoguang. Gu Nianji guessed that he was looking for Qin Yaoguang. After all, he had already captured her. If he didn't make full use of her, he wouldn't be Yi Qingjian. However, Gu Nianji didn't want Qin Yaoguang to get close to He Zhichu at all. She immediately said, General He, are you looking for Qin Yaoguang to discuss it? You trust Qin Yaoguang that much? If she does something, it'll be too late even if you let the entire Qin family die with her. Yi Qingjian pursed his lips and said coldly, she wouldn't dare. If she wanted to do something, she would have done it when she was treating Zhichu. At that time, in order to treat He Zhichu's congenital genetic defect, Qin Yaoguang had all the genes of He Zhichu, Yi Qingjian and Qin Suwen to test her gene therapy. Although she failed again and again, she was not discouraged. In the end, he finally came up with the concept of gene editing. Not only did it open up a new world of genetic science, but it also completely cured He Zhichu. Of course, Yi Qingjian had already ignored Gu Xiangguan, who had actually put it into practice and succeeded. Gu Nianji looked at Yi Qingjian in surprise. She did not understand why he still trusted Qin Yaoguang so much. Gu Nianji didn't know what to say, but she would never allow Qin Yaoguang to get close to He Zhichu again. She really doesn't dare? Just because I haven't done it before doesn't mean I won't do it now. Gu Nianji argued, actually, I have another question. In theory, infrasonic weapons attack without discrimination, so why did they dare to place infrasonic weapons in old Mr. Qin's ward? At that time, Qin Yaoguang and old Mr. Qin were in the ward, but why was young Master He the only one who was affected? Have you ever thought about it? Yi Qingjian frowned. Qin Yaoguang should have been hit as well. As for Qin Bei, it doesn't matter if he falls for it or not. Because she fainted too. Gu Nianji didn't agree with Yi Qingjian's opinion. She had Lu Jin, the super cheat, so she said very confidently, Qin Yaoguang definitely didn't fall for it. She's so cunning, how could she fall for it? It must be an act. As expected, Yi Qingjian hesitated. Was he wrong? Qin Yaoguang was actually fine? He remembered that when he arrived, Qin Yaoguang had already fainted. However, she had fainted at the door, not in the ward. According to He Zhichu's personal secretary, Qin Yaoguang had come out to talk to them for a while. Then, she suddenly said that she had a headache and fainted. Gu Nianji saw that Yi Qingjian was indeed hesitating, so she immediately said, if she was also hit, then she should still be unconscious like young Master He. I want to ask, how is she now? Are you awake? Yi Qingjian glanced at his personal secretary. His personal secretary immediately called the place where Qin Yaoguang and old Master Qin were being held and asked, how's the situation there? Has the detained suspect, Qin Yaoguang, woken up? The guard on the other side poked his head out to take a look and said, Qin Yaoguang is already awake. Qin Bei is still sleeping. Yi Qingjian's personal secretary immediately said to Yi Qingjian, Qin Yaoguang is indeed awake. Gu Nianji immediately said, look, am I right? If Qin Yaoguang was also attacked by an infrasonic weapon, then young Master He should be able to wake up as well. But young Master He didn't wake up, which is enough to show that Qin Yaoguang wasn't injured by the infrasonic weapon. If it's true that she fainted, then there must be another reason. Gu Nianji's analysis was logical, and she was extremely convinced of her own reasoning. The corners of Yi Qingjian's eyes twitched, and his expression was extremely stiff, as if he couldn't believe this fact. Qin Yaoguang, the woman who had fallen in love with him since she met him at the age of 18 and had loved him for decades, dared to play tricks on him. He had admitted that she had played tricks on him. He had indeed let her down back then. But if she wanted to play tricks on his son, then he would be sorry. Yi Qingjian narrowed his eyes, and his fingers gradually clenched into fists. Gu Nianji continued to suggest, but I still find it strange that the three of them were in the same room. Why was young Master He the most injured by the infrasonic weapon? Should we check old Master Qin's oxygen mask and the clothes Qin Yaoguang was wearing? She realized that Yi Qingjian's suspicions about the Qin family weren't deep enough, and she was worried that when Shuyi would come up with some bad idea to exonerate Qin Yaoguang and old Master Qin. Therefore, she further guided Yi Qingjian to confirm his suspicions. Yi Qingjian also thought of this at this moment and immediately said to his personal secretary, go get someone to move everything in that ward to the base laboratory. Have them check it carefully for me. Don't let anything go. Yes, Chief. He Qingjian's personal secretary quickly called the police and soldiers guarding the ward in the hospital to convey He Qingjian's instructions. The soldiers and police on the other side quickly moved to pack up all the equipment in the ward, from a piece of tissue to the entire hospital bed. The lockdown of the entire hospital had ended after He Qingjian found the source of the infrasonic wave emission and took the person in charge away. However, the ward was still a crime scene and was still sealed. The entire ward had been emptied, but He Qingjian's soldiers were still guarding the door of the ward, not allowing anyone to enter or leave. When the equipment and furniture in the ward were moved to the military base laboratory, He Qingjian had already returned to his home. He wanted to bring Gu Nianji to see He Zhichu and have her accompany him and talk to him in his ear so that He Zhichu wouldn't give up and persevere. He turned around and saw that the ace of the Far East, Peter, was still following him closely. He felt that he was an eyesore and said coldly, "Mr. Peter, don't you have to go to work?" Wu Xiaoheng smiled. "My current job is to accompany lawyer Gu. Gu Nianji." He Qingjian glanced at him and said aloofly, "Then wait outside. I want to bring Nianji in to talk." Wu Xiaoheng made a pleased gesture. He Qingjian pushed open the door to He Zhichu's suite and walked in first. Gu Nianji walked to the door and suddenly turned around to look at Wu Xiaoheng deeply. Her eyes were firm and clear. Her dark jade-like eyes were so dark that it was as if light was shining from the depths of her pupils. Wu Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat, and then his heart sank. He looked over again and saw that Gu Nianji had already revealed a mischievous smile. She reached out her slender, snow-white fingers and stroked his cheek. She said softly, "Mr. Peter, you're so shameless. How can you say something like that? Unfortunately, I won't fall for it. Save it." She glanced sideways at him and locked her gaze on his face for about 5 seconds. Then she lowered her eyes gently. Her long eyelashes, which were like crow's wings, covered her eyes. Her expression didn't change, but she had already turned her head away. That glance almost saw through Wu Xiaoheng's heart. He stood there alone and looked at Gu Nianji's straight and graceful back. This was the first time he felt Gu Nianji's mature charm. Her aura was almost on par with his and they were on par. Gu Nianji was also excited, but she was already familiar with hiding her emotions. Even He Qingjian only looked at her in confusion and waved. "Nianji, coming quickly." Gu Nianji walked in and followed He Qingjian into He Zhichu's bedroom. He Zhichu was still lying in the oxygen mask. The instruments in the room showed that everything was normal, but the brain waves in his brain were still in an inactive state. He Qingjian looked at his son and was a little sad. "Nianji, I only have this one son. I'm willing to do anything for him to grow up safely and be happy for the rest of his life." Gu Nianji, what a pitiful parent's heart. Gu Nianji's heart softened at the thought of Lu Jin. She said in a low voice, "General, young master, his injury might not be as serious as we think. I can look up the treatment for this kind of injury online." "You can look it up online?" "Oh." He Qingjian said lightly, "Are you trying to convince me not to listen to the experts and only listen to the information you found on the internet?" Gu Nianji sighed softly and said, "If you agree, I can look it up now. I promise it's not some random information. It's definitely reasonable and can directly guide the treatment." "Is that good?" He Qingjian looked at her suspiciously, but at this time, one more way meant one more way. In order to save He Zhichu, He Qingjian was willing to accept any situation. The two of them talked for a while before they heard the orderly knock on the door. Reporting to Chief. The executive director of the Qin Corporation's private hospital, Wen Shuyi, wants to see Qin Yaoguang. This was today's second update, Chapter 1681, Poor Parents. A reminder of everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1693. Qin Yaoguang and Old Master Qin had both been brought back by He Qingjian to assist in the treatment. If Wen Shuyi wanted to see them, she had to get He Qingjian's permission. Gu Nianji's heart tightened. When Shuyi was indeed here, she was quite daring. Not only did she not take her seriously, but she was also certain that He Qingjian would accept her suggestion in the end. In fact, if Lu Jin hadn't interfered, Gu Nianji was sure that Qin Yaoguang and Wen Shuyi would have succeeded again. Gu Nianji's feathered eyelashes fluttered, and she said calmly, "General He, no matter what, I hope you can wait until the results of the test are out before making a decision. Young Master He's current condition is still stable. If you don't have full confidence, let someone treat him. You also know that a skilled doctor might be able to make young Master He suffer a fate worse than death." Gu Nianji made the consequences sound very serious because she wanted to plant more seeds of doubt in He Qingjian's heart. He Qingjian listened silently. With his hands behind his back, he paced around the room. After a while, he looked up at her and frowned. She didn't do anything back then. If she does it now, it will only anger me. What good will it do to her and the Qin family? Even if Qin Yaoguang wanted to do it, Qin Beiyue wouldn't allow her to do it. He Qingjian knew old Master Qin very well. This person had developed the Qin family from a small wealthy family in the south to a wealthy family. His knowledge and foresight were not something ordinary people could compare to. Gu Nianji didn't know old Master Qin very well, and she didn't want to analyze the problem from old Master Qin's perspective. She was only speculating about Qin Yaoguang and old Master Qin's mentality and actions from the worst possible angle. General He, of course what you said makes sense. However, what you said has a premise, and that is that what they did to young Master He in secret will be discovered by you. That's why you will be angered and take revenge on them. But what if they're so sure that they did it, and no one else will find out that it had anything to do with them? Gu Nianji raised her head slightly, revealing her slender, fair neck. Her expression was calm and collected. For example, this time if you were also frightened, it would be less likely to be a relapse. Then who knows where the secret room is? Who knows that there are infrasonic weapons in the secret room? Who knows that young Master He was attacked by infrasonic weapons 24 hours a day? He Qingjian was stunned. That's right, looking at things from a different perspective, the conclusion seemed to be completely different. From your own point of view, you believe that all conspiracies against young Master He will be discovered by you. The people who carry out the conspiracies will definitely suffer your merciless revenge. Therefore, those people will definitely not do things that are thankless, nor will they carry out any conspiracies against young Master He. But this is your mentality, not the mentality of the person who carried out the conspiracy. To put it simply, if people who do bad things believe that they will definitely be discovered, then no one in this world will do bad things. In fact, there are many bad people in this world. What? Didn't they know that they would be punished if they were discovered? Of course they knew, but they thought they wouldn't be discovered. This is their motive and starting point. From this perspective, Qin Yaoguang and old Master Qin could have done something to hurt young Master He, as long as they are sure that you won't find out who the real culprit is. Gu Nianji's words completely changed He Qingjian's mind. It was true that he rarely tried to figure out the mentality of others from this angle. You're saying that they are sure that I will recognize Jichu as a relapse? He Qingjian muttered, so I will definitely find Qin Yaoguang to treat Jichu's illness, then I will definitely release her. During the treatment, I won't be able to tell what she will do even if I see her with my own eyes. Gu Nianji nodded heavily. You're right. That's the reason. We're not medical experts. It's too risky to hand the person we value the most to someone we don't trust. He Qingjian didn't say a word after hearing this. He walked back and forth in the room with his hands behind his back. After walking for an unknown period of time, Gu Nianji felt like she was about to go blind. The knock on the door finally made He Qingjian stop. He looked up at the intercom and asked, "What is it?" "Reporting to Chief. The test report is out." The person who spoke was He Qingjian's personal secretary. Her voice trembled slightly. He Qingjian quickly opened the door. "Come in and talk." He Qingjian's personal secretary walked into the living room of He Jichu's suite with a translucent red folder containing the test report. She closed the door behind her and said excitedly, "Chief, Qin Bei's oxygen mask and Qin Yaoguang's surgical gown are both mysterious." He Qingjian snatched the folder and opened it to read at a glance. Gu Nianji pretended to be curious and asked He Qingjian's personal secretary with wide eyes. "What's the mystery? Can I know?" He Qingjian's personal secretary quickly looked at He Qingjian and said, "Chief, can you tell Miss Gu?" He Qingjian said without looking up, "It's okay. She's my lawyer. You can tell her." He Qingjian's personal secretary puffed out her chest and gestured to Gu Nianji with a beaming face. "Lawyer Gu, you don't know Qin Bei's oxygen mask. TSK, I think it can defend against a nuclear bomb. It can defend against magnetic energy, light energy, and electric energy. Of course, not to mention sound waves. Ultrasound and infrasound waves can be blocked." Qin Yaoguang is even more interesting. The surgical gown on her body, the surgical cap on her head, and the mask on her face are all vacuum. Gu Nianji already knew that vacuum was the most effective way to isolate infrasound weapons. However, she could only ask in confusion, "What's wrong with vacuum? What's the point?" You don't know this. Vacuum can isolate infrasound waves. He Qingjian's personal secretary stretched out her hand and almost slapped her thigh like an old woman in the countryside. However, halfway through her slap, she felt that it was inappropriate and too embarrassing, so she quickly turned around and slapped her other arm. Gu Nianji heard the crisp sound and saw He Qingjian's personal secretary grit her teeth in pain. She held back her laughter and clapped loudly. I understand. They all knew about the infrasound weapons beforehand, so they took precautions in advance. From the looks of it, young master He was the only one who was attacked. He Qingjian had also finished reading the test report. Qin Yaoguang and Qin Bei had irrefutable evidence. They could only lie to fools if they said they didn't know anything. Not to mention that He Qingjian was a cunning and very suspicious person. How could he be fooled by them? But what if he hadn't thought of testing the oxygen mask and surgical gown? Or perhaps he hadn't thought of where the secret room was and what the consequences would be? He Qingjian threw the report on the ground with a loud bang. He was so angry that he was panting heavily. His chest heaved up and down violently, he gritted his teeth and his face turned purple. He was so angry that he was about to explode. At that moment, the orderly's voice came from the door. Reporting to the chief. The executive director of the Qin Corporation's private hospital, Wen Shuyi, requests to see the chief. This time she didn't say she wanted to see Qin Yaoguang. She said she wanted to see He Qingjian. Of course she was here to plead for Qin Yaoguang. Gu Nianji had thought that He Qingjian would definitely not see Wen Shuyi, but after a few heavy breaths He Qingjian said, "Let her in." He Qingjian left He Zhichu's suite and went downstairs to see Wen Shuyi. His personal secretary saw Gu Nianji's anxious expression and shook her head sympathetically. Without saying anything she turned around and followed He Qingjian down. Gu Nianji ran out in a hurry and was grabbed by the arm by Hua Xiaoheng, who had been waiting at the door. "What are you doing?" Gu Nianji forcefully pried away his iron-like hand and said anxiously, "I can't let Wen Shuyi continue to be glib." "Calm down." Hua Xiaoheng grabbed her with a cold expression. He Zhichu is He Qingjian's son. No one can stop him if he wants to die. Whether his son lives or dies is none of your business. Mr. Peter, you've gone too far. Gu Nianji finally pried Hua Xiaoheng's hand away. She frowned and said unhappily, "Young master, he has saved me many times. I can't just watch him be tortured by Qin Yaoguang and Wen Shuyi. I have to stop them." Hua Xiaoheng pursed his lips. His eyes were unfathomable and his face was expressionless. He enunciated each word clearly. "You saved He Zhichu's life in the first place. You don't owe him anything." This was no longer a secret. The He family knew about it. Hua Xiaoheng had heard Lu Jin mention it clearly when he had installed the bug as a member of the KGB. Gu Nianji took a deep breath to calm herself down. She said softly, "Just like last time, I didn't want you to be killed because of me and I would take the bullet for you. Now that young master he is unconscious, and I know that those people have ulterior motives, I will never forgive myself for not helping him." In the end, she forcefully pried Hua Xiaoheng's hand away and ran towards the stairs. Hua Xiaoheng stood quietly for a while. He looked back and saw Gu Nianji's back disappear up the spiral staircase. The corners of his lips curled up, and he put his hands in his trouser pockets. He walked unhurriedly towards the staircase. In the living room of the He residence, Wen Shuyi was already sitting opposite He Qingjian. She was trying her best to persuade him. "General He, I know you have a lot of questions and so do I. But now is not the time to pursue these questions. The most important thing for us now is to wake young Master He up. And the only person who has the ability to wake young Master He up is Auntie Qin," Wen Shuyi said confidently. "If you don't believe me, you have to believe Auntie Qin. She's infatuated with you and she even had a child with you. I still remember how happy Auntie Qin was when she found out that she was pregnant with your child. It was as if she had the whole world. She's never been so happy in her life." Gu Nianji couldn't help scoffing when she heard this. She thought to herself that this was a living example of reasoning with reason and moving with emotion. She slowly walked over and stood behind the sofa where He Qingjian was sitting. She also put her hands in her trouser pockets and leisurely set up a bridge. Objection. Putting yourself in his shoes, since Qin Yaoguang wants to have a child with General He so much, she must hate young Master He to the core. How could she sincerely want to save him? This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1682, Putting Yourself in His Shoes. Remind everyone of your monthly votes and recommendation votes. 8 p.m. The second update. Moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1694. When Shuyi's emotional expression was interrupted by Gu Nianji. She was very unhappy. She looked up at Gu Nianji and clenched her fists. Gu Nianji, why do you have to think of others so unbearably and viciously? Auntie Qin is just happy to have her and General He's child. How can she hate young Master He to the bone? Where's your logic? You're not just spouting nonsense, you're slandering him. When Shuyi was so agitated that her face turned red, Gu Nianji shrugged. I don't think of others as unbearably and viciously. I just don't think of Qin Yaoguang as a saint who doesn't care about herself and only cares about others. She leaned forward slightly and said to the silent He Qingjian, General He, actually, if a woman really loves you, she will definitely be jealous of her rival in love. If she doesn't even have jealousy, then it's either not love or she's lying to you. But for someone like Qin Yaoguang who doesn't even treat her own daughter as a human being, how much sincerity does she have for someone else's son? Right? I'm just doing it from a human perspective. Gu Nianji was firing on all cylinders. Her expression was still indifferent, and her tone was still gentle and calm. The ancients said that one's child is also the child of others, but they didn't say that one's child is also the child of others. Wasn't what Qin Yaoguang had done to her the same as killing one's child and others' child? Using her life in exchange for He Zhichu's life. When Shuyi immediately caught the loophole in Gu Nianji's words and laughed. She glanced at He Qingjian and said, So Miss Gu is still unwilling to save young Master He? Auntie Qin did this to save young Master He. If Miss Gu has any complaints, I think young Master He has already repaid your favor for all these years. Gu Nianji looked at her calmly and said, You can still laugh? Young Master He is unconscious and his life and death are unknown. General He's heart is burning with anxiety. You're clearly here to discuss how to save young Master He, but you can still laugh at this time. Yes, I suddenly feel that you seem to have a plan for young Master He's condition. Could it be that this was also planned by you beforehand? These words were like a loud slap to Wen Shuyi's face. Her smile froze in an instant, like a human face in a plaster mold. Half of it was angry and the other half was smiling. That expression was too horrible to look at. Wen Shuyi was furious. Gu Nianji's reaction was too fast. He Qingjian's gaze darted between Wen Shuyi and Gu Nianji. Seeing that they were arguing, He Qingjian suddenly said, If that's the case, bring Qin Yaoguang here and ask her what she can do. He gave his personal secretary a look, and the personal secretary quickly left the living room to bring Qin Yaoguang. Gu Nianji frowned. Just as she was about to speak, she saw Hua Xiaoheng's fingers suddenly shake twice in her direction from the corner of her eye. Gu Nianji immediately shut her mouth and stood there with an indifferent expression. She didn't say anything else. When Shuyi was overjoyed. She had come here to beg He Qingjian to let her see Qin Yaoguang so that she could come out and treat He Zhichu's injury. Gu Nianji had come out to cause trouble. She had thought that the matter was over, but she hadn't expected Gu Nianji's words to be useless. He Qingjian obviously still trusted Auntie Qin. When Shuyi was instantly filled with confidence. She told He Qingjian about the situation at the Qin private hospital and expressed the hospital's determination to rectify it. It had to comply with the government's regulatory regulations and so on. She rambled on for a while before Qin Yaoguang was brought in. He Qingjian's personal secretary followed him in and whispered in He Qingjian's ear, Chief, Miss Xie Qingying is also here. She's been waiting outside for a long time to see young Master He. Xie Qingying? He Qingjian frowned and thought for a moment. He nodded slowly. Let her in. He Qingjian's personal secretary quickly sent a message to the guard at the door to ask him to let Xie Qingying in. When Xie Qingying came in, she saw that there were quite a lot of people in the living room. He Qingjian sat alone on the large three-seater sofa facing south. Opposite him was also a large three-seater sofa, and Wen Shuyi was sitting there. On the single-seater sofa on the right was the Deputy Chief Consul of the Soviet Union, Peter, who was also Gu Nianji's suitor. On the single-seater sofa on the left was the famous knife in the brain surgery department, Qin Yaoguang. Xie Qingying raised an eyebrow and looked at Gu Nianji, who was standing behind He Qingjian's sofa. Gu Nianji nodded slowly at her, then slowly took a few steps away from He Qingjian's back and stood on the right side of his sofa. She was right next to the single-seater sofa where Hua Xiaoheng was sitting. Hua Xiaoheng looked up at her from the corner of his eye and said with a half-smile, Lawyer Gu, do you want to sit down too? Gu Nianji crossed her arms and said calmly, You're letting me? No, you can sit on my lap. Hua Xiaoheng stretched his legs and a faint smile blossomed on his face. Gu Nianji rolled her eyes and ignored him. Her attention was already focused on Qin Yaoguang. Qin Yaoguang's full attention was on He Qingjian. She looked at him almost greedily as if she hadn't seen him in a long time. When Xie Qingying saw this, she found a spot in the corner of the living room and stood quietly. He Qingjian's personal secretary whispered, "Miss Xie, there are seats over there." He pointed to the two European-style late Renaissance sofas by the window. The sofa was gorgeous and dignified, and in the middle was a small high table with complicated carvings. It was a good place to drink afternoon tea under the afternoon sun. Xie Qingying nodded and said softly, "Thank you." Then she walked over and sat down. When Shui had already spoken. "Auntie Qin, are you feeling better?" Qin Yaoguang knew that when Shui was asking about her fainting. She rubbed her forehead and said, "I'm fine. I just had hypoglycemia so I couldn't hold on and fainted." Gu Nianji said expressionlessly, "Surgeons have hypoglycemia? Dean Qin, did you have hypoglycemia in the past or did you only have it now?" Qin Yaoguang didn't want to talk to Gu Nianji, so she pretended not to hear her and continued to ask when Shui, "Why did you come to see me?" When Shui saw that Qin Yaoguang was ignoring Gu Nianji, so she felt very comfortable. Her expression became even gentler. "Auntie Qin is like this. Young master, he hasn't woken up yet. It doesn't look like he has a relapse, but was injured by infrasonic waves. I want to ask you to help young master he. Your medical skills are excellent," Gu Nianji added. "Dean Qin is the leader of the brain surgery department, but young master he's injury has nothing to do with the brain surgery department, right?" Qin Yaoguang frowned and looked over. She scolded in a low voice, "Unruly. Why are you interrupting when others are talking? She's my lawyer. Her words are my words." He Qingjian actually spoke and his tone wasn't very polite. Qin Yaoguang choked and glared at Gu Nianji. She said to He Qingjian, "Brother He, don't spoil her. Don't call me brother He. We're not related by blood, nor are we friends. I don't deserve to be called brother." He Qingjian was trying to cut off all ties with Qin Yaoguang. Qin Yaoguang's face turned pale. "General He, what do you mean? Dean Qin, if you want to catch up, let's wait until young master He wakes up, okay?" Gu Nianji retorted rudely. She looked at He Qingjian. "General He, do you still insist on letting this person who doesn't care about young master He treat young master He? When I treated young master He, you weren't even born yet." Qin Yaoguang snorted coldly. "Don't flatter me in front of me. It disgusts me to see it." She was completely blunt with Gu Nianji now. She was even worse than a passerby. However, the more she acted like this, the happier Gu Nianji was. If Qin Yaoguang put on a motherly face, she would have vomited to death. "But you didn't cure young master He's illness." Gu Nianji threw out a sentence. Qin Yaoguang died. He Qingjian's eyes flashed and he said, "Jichu's injuries are very serious. I don't know how to treat him." Gu Nianji quickly said, "General He, I told you I'll find a way to save young master He. Don't make a rash decision." She was afraid that He Qingjian wouldn't let Qin Yaoguang treat He Jichu, so she quickly said, "General He, since we found out that young master He was injured by infrasonic waves, we have to be more careful. Do you believe that a person who knows nothing about medicine will find those unreliable treatments online? Or do you want an experienced doctor who knows young master He's physical condition like the back of his hand to treat young master He?" Was there a need to choose just by listening to her? Of course it was Qin Yaoguang. Gu Nianji didn't look reliable. He Qingjian's gaze swept between Gu Nianji and Qin Yaoguang, then he said, "Have you treated the same type of injury before?" Gu Nianji was stunned. Of course she hadn't. She wasn't a doctor. Even for a doctor, it was rare to see such cases of people being injured by infrasonic weapons. Qin Yaoguang was also stunned for a moment, and her eyes flashed. She had never treated the same type of case before, but she had performed so many surgeries and the treatment was similar. Therefore, Qin Yaoguang insisted, "Although I haven't done the exact same injury before, I will give him the most detailed examination, design the most perfect plan, and hand it over to the most capable specialist in our hospital to treat him." Gu Nianji sneered and looked up at the Italian crystal lamp hanging from the ceiling. "So Dean Qin hasn't done it either. Or even, can I be the same as you?" Qin Yaoguang was about to get angry again. She glared at Gu Nianji. "Who spoiled you with the habit of interrupting people at every turn? Can't you change it?" Gu Nianji quickly glanced at Huo Xiaoheng. She thought to herself, "The person who spoiled me is sitting right here. It's a pity that you have eyes but can't see it." Before Huo Xiaoheng looked up, Gu Nianji had already looked away. She said, "It's a pity that no one spoiled me. I was born and raised." Qin Yaoguang, when Shui coughed and couldn't help smiling. She said, General He, I don't need to tell you what choice you want to make, do I? He Qingjian leaned back on the low-key and luxurious Renaissance-style three-seater sofa. He frowned and said, none of you have any experience. I still don't think it's reliable. What should we do? General He, Andy Qin actually has experience, but it's not exactly the same. However, that's how surgery is. A real expert is someone who can master everything. She's not like those who haven't even entered medical school. They think that they can become medical masters just by searching on Google. When Shuyi was obviously mocking Gun Yanji's confidence came from Lu Jin. Lu Jin was the one who had drawn up the treatment plan for He Jichu, so she argued confidently with Wen Shuyi. You make it sound like you don't know how to search, Gun Yanji replied with a faint smile. The key is to know how to search. He Chengjian listened to them argue for a while before saying slowly, if that's the case, I want you to treat the same injury first. If you can cure it, then use it on Achu. Gun Yanji suddenly looked up at He Chengjian, and the smile on her face turned cold. Good, very good. As expected of the ruthless and cunning He Chengjian, he actually wanted to experiment on a living person. Gun Yanji couldn't bear to see such a thing happen. Ijichu's life was a life, but wasn't the life of an ordinary person a life? She asked softly, General He, what do you mean? I don't understand. He Chengjian looked at her, then at Qin Yaoguang. He said, I'll restore the entire environment of that ward, including the secret room. Then I'll put the two of them in that simulated environment for 24 hours. After their injuries stabilize, you can use your methods to treat these two people. Let's see who has the best method of saving them. We'll use it on Achu. Gun Yanji's heart sank. As expected. She pursed her lips and resisted the idea because she didn't want to use ordinary people as practice. When Shuyi and Qin Yaoguang were pleasantly surprised. That's great. Let's do that. General He, don't worry. We'll definitely save that person. He Qingjian nodded. I'm relieved that you said that. He waved his hand expressionlessly. Someone rebuild the ward in the secret room. Transfer Qin Bei to that ward. No oxygen masks, all of them in their natural state. Use their infrasonic weapons to shoot infrasonic waves at him for 24 hours. Qin Bei was Old Master Qin Yaoguang's father, and the chairman of the Qin Corporation's private hospital. This was today's second update, Chapter 1683, Beating Them at Their Own Game. Remind everyone of your monthly votes and recommendation votes. Moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1695. Qin Yaoguang raised her head abruptly. Her eyes, which had been misty and blurry just a moment ago, almost popped out of their sockets. She subconsciously said, What? You want to use my father as an experiment? How can that work? Gun Yanji's lips were also wide open. She was about to object, but when she heard the name Qin Bei, it was like a silencer. She couldn't say a word. Although she couldn't bear to see ordinary people being used as live experiments, Qin Bei, this old man couldn't be said to be an ordinary person at all, and he wasn't an innocent passerby. Gun Yanji slowly pursed her lips, and her lively eyes looked back and forth between Wen Shuyi and Qin Yaoguang with interest. He Chengjian sat up straight and slowly replied to Qin Yaoguang, Why not? When you guys fired infrasonic waves at my son, I didn't hear you guys say, no. Although his voice was slow and his tone wasn't particularly heavy, the meaning behind his words made Qin Yaoguang and Wen Shuyi shiver together. They had almost forgotten how ruthless He Chengjian was. In the past, He Chengjian had never used his methods on them, so they really didn't feel it deeply. When He Chengjian had chased after Gu Xiangwen until the sky was dark, and Gu Xiangwen had no choice but to burn himself to death in public, they had been quite impressed by He Chengjian's abilities and methods. However, when this kind of ability and methods fell on them, they realized that it was really an unbearable weight in life. When Shuyi's mind raced as she said, General He, it was an accident that young Master He was injured by an infrasonic weapon. I believe that Auntie Qin and Old Master Qin didn't know about it. Also, where the infrasonic weapon came from is also a problem. You don't think that our Qin Corporation's private hospital group can get such an exquisite weapon, do you? He Chengjian stared at her intently. He thought that if it weren't for the fact that he had tested the oxygen mask on Qin Bei's body and the surgical gown on Qin Yaoguang's body, Wen Shuyi's words would definitely have convinced him. He would never believe that this matter had anything to do with the Qin Corporation. He might even think that someone was deliberately framing him. Gun Yanji was also sweating profusely. If Lu Jin hadn't tested that there was something wrong with the oxygen mask and Qin Yaoguang's surgical gown, she wouldn't have reminded He Qingjian to do these tests. Perhaps they would eventually discover the problem, but by then He Zhichu would have definitely been operated on by Qin Yaoguang. At that time, even if they discovered the mystery of the oxygen mask and surgical gown, what could they do? He Zhichu had already become their bargaining chip. No matter how powerful He Qingjian was, he wouldn't watch his only son die. Gu Nianji could only secretly feel ashamed and lucky after thinking about this series of arrangements. The only thing they didn't expect was that Gu Xiangwen wasn't dead. Therefore he let go and did it unscrupulously. Lu, after Lu Mu and Lu ago, bin Lu ago. Hua Xiaoheng sat calmly in his seat with his legs crossed. He didn't speak and looked lazy, but he was actually carefully observing the expressions and movements of the people in the room. Perhaps it was the onlooker who saw things more clearly. After watching for a while he found an interesting phenomenon. Gu Nianji and Qin Yaoguang were biological mother and daughter. The two of them did look very similar, especially their pair of curvy lips. They were so lifelike that it was as if they had been measured with a ruler. However, when Qin Yaoguang's eyes widened, Hua Xiaoheng suddenly realized that Qin Yaoguang's eyes were completely different from Gu Nianji's. Gu Nianji's eyes were large, round, and full. They were so dark that they were translucent, and her eyelashes were long and thick, with a natural mascara effect. Qin Yaoguang's eyes were actually slender almond-shaped eyes. However, the center of her eyes was relatively round, so at first glance she looked somewhat similar to Gu Nianji's big eyes. When she widened her eyes, this difference was clearly revealed. Gu Nianji's eyes were completely different from Lu Jin's. Generally speaking, a child's facial features were somewhat similar to their parents. Some resembled their father, while others resembled their mother. For example, Gu Nianji's lips looked like Qin Yaoguang's, her tall and straight nose resembled Lu Jin's, and the shape of her face was similar to the combination of the two of them. Only her eyes did not resemble either of them. However, Hua Xiaoheng did not pay much attention to it. Since the appearance of a child resembling neither its father nor its mother was a common occurrence in the population, his discovery did not prove anything. Hua Xiaoheng suppressed this thought in the depths of his heart and continued to observe the people in the room. He Qingjian put down his crossed arms and stared intently at Wen Shui. He said calmly, "Yes, where did such an exquisite weapon come from? It's indeed a problem. In the land of goodness that I'm in charge of, this kind of situation occurred and it was used on my own son. I have to bear the main responsibility, and I can't absolve myself from the blame." Wen Shui did not expect He Qingjian to take the initiative to take responsibility. She quickly said, "General He, don't blame yourself too much. We don't know what exactly happened. Besides," her gaze drifted to where Hua Xiaoheng was sitting. "I can't think of any other country that has the ability to transport such a large weapon to our country without anyone noticing and store it in a secret room. Other than the KGB of the Soviet Union and the CIA, I can't think of any other country that has the ability to do so." Gu Nianji was a little nervous. She had to admit that Wen Shui was quite capable. She was good at shifting the blame. To be honest, if it weren't for the irrefutable evidence provided by Lu Jin, He Qingjian would have most likely believed that this was a conspiracy by foreign forces against He Zhichu. Everything had been shifted to the KGB of the Soviet Union, but it was actually shifted to Peter. It was perfect. Gu Nianji had not forgotten that He Zhichu had shot and killed a few Soviet snipers outside the hospital. Her hand unconsciously dropped and landed on the edge of Hua Xiaoheng's sofa. Hua Xiaoheng saw it from the corner of his eye. He couldn't help reaching out and holding her hand. Her hand was cold, but her palms were sweating. This girl was tough on the outside but weak on the inside. Hua Xiaoheng gently squeezed her hand to tell her not to worry too much. Gu Nianji immediately felt her courage multiply, and her mind worked faster than usual. She shook off Hua Xiaoheng's hand and raised her arms, still crossed them. She sneered, "Yo, Director Wen, you're breaking the rules by shifting the blame. It clearly happened in your hospital, and the person you pushed out to take the blame was also your hospital's management. You've completely forgotten about it. If you ask me if it was the KGB of the Soviet Union or the CIA, would they need to use such a stupid method to deal with young Master He?" Gu Nianji shrugged and gestured a pistol with her hand. She aimed it at Wen Shui and imitated the sound of a gunshot. She said, "They're best at sniping and assassinating. With such a good place like the secret room, wouldn't it be better for the sniper to hide inside and kill him with one shot? It would take another 24 hours to leave an infrasound emitter in there, but it would only make young Master He faint. Such a stupid method to frame the KGB of the Soviet Union and the CIA. You've lowered their IQ, Gunyenji said meaningfully. Gunyenji said meaningfully. Her bright eyes narrowed into slits as she smiled. The ridicule in her eyes was obvious. When Shui was extremely annoyed with Gunyenji. A good game of chess had been messed up by her. Why was such a person still alive in this world? When Shui scoffed and said, I didn't expect Lawyer Gu to know so much about the KGB of the Soviet Union's methods. Is it because you have contact with the KGB of the Soviet Union? Director Wen, if you're stupid you should read more. I got all that I knew from books. The history of the KGB of the Soviet Union, the man who ran a spy, the autobiography of a KGB agent, and my days as the director of the CIA. Read about these books. These books were actually the bedtime that Hua Xiaoheng had given Gunyenji back then. Storybook. At that time, Gunyenji was young and didn't dare to make any requests. Hua Xiaoheng didn't know how to take care of a child, so he gave her the entertainment books that he usually read during his leisure time as bedtime reading. Gunyenji, who had an excellent memory, read them once and memorized the contents of these books. Now she could recite any sentence that was mentioned casually. When Shui glared at Gunyenji and pursed her lips. All right, Lawyer Gu, we all know that you're knowledgeable, but this isn't the time for you to be smart. Young Master He is still unconscious. You finally realized that young Master He is unconscious. Gunyenji pursed her lips. I saw that you were rambling just now, even bringing up the KGB of the Soviet Union and the CIA. That's why I helped you out. Since you don't appreciate my kindness, then forget it. When Shui was so angry that she was about to explode. She had been trying her best to persuade her, but Gunyenji had mocked her for doing a crosstalk. If they weren't at the He family's house, when Shui felt that she wouldn't have let her off easy. He Qingjin also said, you're getting off topic. What we need to do now is to save Achu. My opinion won't change. Qin Beiyoi, you must go to the rebuilt ward and receive a 24-hour infrasound attack. Only then can you perfectly restore Achu's injuries. But my father is so old. He definitely won't be able to survive for 24 hours. Qin Yaoguang cried out and pounced on him, almost kneeling on the ground. General He, I beg you. I beg you. Someone else. She raised her hand and pointed at Gunyenji, who was standing diagonally behind He Qingjin, and said loudly, change to Nyenji. She's young and in good health. And young Master He treats her so well. She definitely won't object, right? Nyenji? Gunyenji raised an eyebrow and said in surprise, why do you want me, a completely unrelated person, to pay for what you did? This isn't fair. I'm sorry, I don't agree. I'm willing to save young Master He, but I can't take the blame for you like this. Gunyenji rolled her eyes and saw Wen Shui, who had a faint smile on her lips. She raised her chin. General He, if old Mr. Qin is too old, you can change to Wen Shui. She is the executive director of the Qin Corporation's private hospital group. Other than old Mr. Qin and Qin Yaoguang, she has the highest status. She is about the same age as young Master He, and she is also very healthy. She is the best material for human experiments. When Shuyi's smile froze on her face, Gunyenji didn't allow her to refute. She continued, Director Wen, as the saying goes, a drop of water should be repaid with a spring of water. You've received so many benefits from the Qin family, and the Qin family has practically given you a second life. You definitely won't refuse such a small favor, right? This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1684, Definitely Won't Refuse. A reminder of everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. At 8 p.m. the second update. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1696. The light in Wen Shuyi's eyes dimmed. Gunyenji was too vicious. She had actually set up such a trap for her. How could she answer? The Qin family had indeed been very kind to her. Her current status was entirely due to the Qin family. He Qingjin raised his eyebrows slightly and looked Wen Shuyi up and down, as if he was thinking about the feasibility of this suggestion. Seeing this, Qin Yaoguang quickly said, Shuyi can do it too. She's indeed young and healthy. Gunyenji isn't willing, but Shuyi will definitely be willing. Isn't that right, Shuyi? When Shuyi was helpless, but the situation was not in her favor. She couldn't be as willful as Gunyenji. With a backer she could do whatever she wanted and refuse directly. When Shuyi lowered her eyes and smiled bitterly. Old Mr. Qin is indeed too old. It's really not good for him to be attacked by an infrasonic weapon for such a long time. I'll go. I believe in Auntie Qin. Auntie Qin will definitely cure me. Good child. My father and I didn't dote on you in vain. Qin Yaoguang turned around and came to Wen Shuyi's side. She held her hand tightly and spoke with great heartache. Yi Qingjian nodded. Okay, then Wen Shuyi can go in too. You can stay with Qin Bei inside. If anything happens to him, you can take care of him. Ha! Qin Yaoguang suddenly turned her head and looked at Yi Qingjian. Didn't I ask Shuyi to replace my father? Why are both of them inside? Yi Qingjian picked up the gold-plated orchid teacup on the coffee table in front of him and blew on it gently. He took a sip and said, when did I say I wanted her to replace me? However, since she took the initiative to go, I won't stop her. With one more experimental target, the data will be more complete. Okay. It's settled then. Qin Yaoguang's heart was as bitter as if it had been soaked in coptish juice. However, looking at Yi Qingjian's cold and vicious expression, she still loved him. Moreover, her love for him hadn't lessened at all. Instead, it had grown stronger. This man was really determined to eat her up. Qin Yaoguang sighed in her heart and reached back to touch Wen Shuyi's face. Good child, you can stay with my father. I'll definitely cure you. Wen Shuyi closed her eyes. She knew that Qin Yaoguang was unreliable. He had no choice but to take this opportunity to win over old Master Qin. He would settle the score with Gu Nianji after he recovered from his injuries. She looked up abruptly and glared at Gu Nianji. Gu Nianji breathed a sigh of relief and said, that's great, just the two of us. One can test Din Qin's treatment method and the other can test my method. When Shuyi gritted her teeth and said coldly, don't dream too much. Mr. Qin and I went there for Aunt Qin. If you want to do the experiment, find someone else. She wasn't going to help Gu Nianji. Gu Nianji didn't take it seriously and smiled at Yi Qingjian. General He, what do you think? Which one is for me to experiment on? Unexpectedly, Yi Qingjian turned around to look at her and said with a smile, then there's nothing I can do. If they don't want to, I can't force them to be your experimental subjects, can I? Gu Nianji almost choked and started coughing. You make it sound like he didn't force her. Who was the one who said they wanted to use live people for experiments? Whether it was Qin Bei or Wen Shuyi, did they have the right to say no? Now they were playing this game with her. Gu Nianji knew that Yi Qingjian didn't completely trust her. Or rather, once his suspicions were aroused, it would be very difficult to dispel them. She clenched her fists and said stubbornly, then what should I do? I can't find two living people to experiment on. General He isn't willing to do one more method for young Master He? If that's the case, why should I be a villain? She turned to look at He Zhichu's room upstairs and said loudly, young Master He, I tried my best. It's not that I didn't want to save you, but your father made things difficult for me and put the Qin family's free will above your life and death. If you have any dissatisfaction, look for your father. Yi Qingjian was so angry at Gu Nianji that his face instantly darkened. Gu Nianji, what are you talking about? Yi Qingjian glared at her angrily. When did I put the Qin family's free will above my son's life and death? Just now they didn't want to be my test subjects. You said it yourself. You said you couldn't force them. Isn't that putting their free will above your son's life and death? Gu Nianji argued fearlessly with Yi Qingjian. Yi Qingjian glared at her for a while and suddenly laughed. Good. No one has ever dared to yell at me. You Gu Nianji are the first. There's always a beginning. Just get used to it, Gu Nianji retorted bluntly. She was so angry that she couldn't care less. Yi Qingjian waved his hand and said, then I'll let you practice with Wen Shuyi. He agreed to let Gu Nianji use Wen Shuyi as the test subject. Gu Nianji breathed a sigh of relief. Just as she was about to say yes, Qin Yaoguang spoke again. No. She objected flatly. Let's put it this way. My father is too old. Even if he were to be attacked by infrasonic waves 24 hours a day in the ward, the damage he would suffer would be very different from young Master He's. People of different ages have different vital signs. The treatment that works on young people might not work on old people. And vice versa. Therefore, my father is only going to accompany me. Shuyi is the one who can really let me test the treatment method. Qin Yaoguang looked at Gu Nianji coldly. Gu Nianji, if you have to joke around with human life, you have to find someone else. Because Wen Shuyi is the only suitable candidate to test my treatment method. Otherwise, you can use my father as an experiment. She was sure that Gu Nianji wouldn't use Qin Bei, an old man in his 70s, as an experiment. Gu Nianji was indeed in a difficult position. She didn't feel bad because Qin Bei was old, but because what Qin Yaoguang had just said made sense. Age did play a role in this treatment method. But where was she going to find a young man about the same age as Hijichu? When Shuyi coughed and glanced at Hu Xiaohan, she said softly, "Actually, isn't there a particularly suitable candidate over there? Since Mr. Peter is pursuing Miss Gu, he can't make things difficult for Miss Gu, right? Why don't Mr. Peter help Miss Gu find someone to experiment with?" Gu Nianji's face instantly turned cold and she said sternly, "When Shuyi, are you trying to start an international dispute? Mr. Peter is the deputy chief consul of the Soviet Union. Are you tired of living to use him as a live experiment? Or do you think our country is too peaceful and there are no wars? If you dare to touch him, the KGB will make you die a graveless death in minutes." He Qingjian also thought that when Shuyi was being ridiculous. She was tired of living to use Peter as an experiment. "Alright, why don't I go find someone else?" He Qingjian waved his hand. "When Shuyi will experiment with Qin Yaoguang." Gu Nianji was extremely conflicted. She trusted Lu Jin's method very much and knew that it would definitely work. However, she had to convince He Qingjian, which was more difficult. He Qingjian seemed to be someone who wouldn't release the eagle until he saw the rabbit. Words were worthless. He had to see the results before he would let her help treat Hijichu. However, Gu Nianji felt that it was too cruel to randomly find someone to undergo this kind of experiment. She couldn't get over this hurdle. "General He, that's not good. Can't I demonstrate it for you on the computer?" In a moment of desperation, Gu Nianji thought of an idea. "I'll experiment with mice. The effect will be the same." "How can that be the same? You have to use living people for the experiment." When Shuyi added fuel to the fire. "If we could use mice, why would General He let us into the ward?" She used He Qingjian's words to shut Gu Nianji up. Gu Nianji was speechless for a moment. While they were in a stalemate, a gentle and firm voice came from the corner of the room. "I'll do it. I'll go to the ward for 24 hours. Then Miss Gu, you can use me as an experiment to test your treatment method." Everyone turned around and saw Xie Qingying slowly stand up from the single-seater sofa in front of the window. The sunlight shone in from the window and gilded her body. He Qingjian was surprised and delighted. "Is it Qingying? Are you really willing?" "Yes, I'm willing." She walked over and stood in front of He Qingjian. "General He, as long as we can save young Master He." She had been listening in the corner for a long time and finally pieced the whole thing together. The power of love could make a woman ignore life and death. Gu Nianji looked at her with a complicated expression and didn't know what to say. Xie Qingying smiled at her. "Lawyer Gu, don't worry. I'm doing this voluntarily. It has nothing to do with you." She could already tell that Gu Nianji was in a dilemma because she didn't want to use ordinary people as experiments. She admired her innocence, but now she had to save Hijichu. She couldn't delay any longer. "Lawyer Gu, let's start as soon as possible. I hope to wake young Master He up as soon as possible," Xie Qingying said calmly. Gu Nianji knew that Hijichu's condition wasn't as serious as it looked, but others didn't know. Xie Qingying didn't have to suffer. But other than that, she had no other way to convince He Qingjian. "General He, what do you think?" She had no choice but to turn to ask He Qingjian. He Qingjian had already returned to normal and nodded calmly. "There's no time to lose. We'll start right away. But before that, you need to sign an agreement to say that you're participating in this experiment voluntarily." He looked at them and said slowly, "After you go in, life and death are up to fate. It has nothing to do with anyone else." This was today's second update, Chapter 1685, Putting Life and Death Aside. Remind everyone of your monthly votes and recommendation votes. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1697. Percent? Arth V? C? R? T? H? 0? C? H? Dollar? A? G? H? F asterisk CK? H? Dollar? H? P? Dollar? F asterisk CK? Chapter 1698. I can't tell Achu either. He Qingjian said lightly, holding the amber pipe in his hand and looking at her calmly. In short, you can't tell anyone. I and my personal secretary know about this. Gu Nianji had just been thinking that if she only hid it from Xie Qingying, even if she didn't say anything, busybodies would run over and tell Xie Qingying. But now, hearing He Qingjian's further request, it didn't seem that simple. Do you really think you can hide it like this? Gu Nianji couldn't help asking. She wasn't trying to argue, she just felt that it was a little unreliable. After all, when Shuyi, Old Master Qin, and Xie Qingying were in the same room, even if they could hide it from the people outside, they couldn't hide it from them. He Qingjian gave a faint and stood up. Come with me. He brought Gu Nianji to a room next to the small conference room and said, the simulation ward is being monitored here. The person sitting in front of the monitor was He Qingjian's personal secretary. His expression was calm as he stared intently at the big screen in front of him. Only then did Gu Nianji realize that there was something more to this simulated ward. The entire room was exactly the same as the one in the Qin Corporation's private hospital. However, in the middle of the room, there was a stiff white curtain that hung from the ceiling to the floor, dividing the room into two halves. To the left of the curtain were two people. One was Wen Shui and the other was Qin Bei. There was only one person on the right side of the curtain. It was Xie Qingying. She was wearing a surgical gown, a surgical cap, and a surgical mask. She was already sleepy. They're in the same ward, but they can't see each other, He Qingjian said softly. 24 hours later, they should be unconscious. Therefore, it was impossible for them to know what happened after that. He Qingjian's personal secretary continued, this Miss Wen is really vigilant and suspicious. She was talking to Miss Xie through the curtain. Is she talking to Xie Qingying? What are you talking about? Gu Nianji asked curiously. Are they close? I don't know if they are familiar with each other, but I understand what Miss Wen means. She wants to make sure that Xie Qingying is on the other side. He Qingjian's personal secretary sneered and shook her head. He's already very impressive. Gu Nianji sighed softly. In this aspect, she especially admired Wen Shui. This person's fighting spirit was especially tenacious, and his energy was especially exuberant. One had to know that it was very tiring to scheme against others at all times and for oneself at the same time. Not only was it mentally taxing, but it was also physically taxing. Gu Nianji felt that she needed to learn from Wen Shui in this area. She couldn't always be passive. He Qingjian's gaze shifted from the surveillance screen to Gu Nianji's side profile. He looked at her quietly for a while and said, if you tell anyone about this, I'll have no choice but to marry you to my son, He Zhichu. Gu Nianji, her heart was in her throat, and the air in the control room almost froze. Gu Nianji stared at He Qingjian in disbelief. She felt like she couldn't breathe and was completely suffocating. The personal secretary in front wished she could plug her ears. You don't believe me? If you don't believe me, try it. He Qingjian turned around and left the surveillance room. As soon as he left, Gu Nianji finally felt like she could breathe again. She took a deep breath, patted her chest, and left the control room without saying anything. When she returned to her suite, she saw Hua Xiaoheng sitting leisurely on the sofa in the living room, flipping through a military magazine. Gu Nianji suddenly calmed down. She walked over to him and sat down, then said, Mr. Peter, do you know how to cook? Hua Xiaoheng looked up at her and shook his head. I said I don't. Don't you want to learn? Gu Nianji leaned forward and asked. You're so smart. You'll definitely learn very quickly. Unfortunately, I'm not interested in cooking. Hua Xiaoheng closed the military magazine and threw it on the coffee table in front of him. He crooked his finger at Gu Nianji and smiled faintly. But if Lawyer Gu is willing to give me a kiss, I'll get someone to cook for you. Then forget it. Gu Nianji rubbed her fingers and said listlessly, I'm going to sleep for a while. It'll be about time when I wake up. Go to sleep. Hua Xiaoheng took the military magazine and lowered his head to read it. I'll stay here with you. Gu Nianji had always been nervous at the He family's house, but this time with Hua Xiaoheng accompanying her outside the bedroom door, she felt extremely safe and at ease. Lying on the bed in the bedroom, she fell asleep almost as soon as she closed her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, it was already time for the surgery experiment. Wen Shui, Qin Bei, and Xie Qingying had already been in the simulation ward for 24 hours. Gu Nianji quickly rushed to the surveillance room to check on the movements of the three of them. She saw that Wen Shui and Old Master Qin were in very bad condition. Wen Shui rubbed her temples with one hand, and her expression was very pained. Her other hand was rubbing her chest as if she was about to vomit at any moment. Old Master Qin, who was beside her, was also pale. He was already paralyzed on the sofa, unable to move. Gu Nianji raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms. It's already been 24 hours and they still haven't fainted? Looks like the power of the infrasonic weapon isn't enough, right? Soon. He Qingjian's personal secretary stared at the surveillance video as he operated on the dashboard. Within a few seconds, Gu Nianji saw Wen Shuyi and Old Master Qin faint one after another. Wen Shuyi collapsed in the aisle towards the door. Old Master Qin fainted on the sofa. On the other side, Xie Qingying rubbed her head, tilted to the side and fainted as well. Gu Nianji leaned over in surprise. What's going on with her? We injected some gas and she fainted when she smelled it, He Qingjian's personal secretary said implicitly. Gu Nianji understood and didn't ask further. She heard the door behind her and turned to see He Qingjian walking in. The operating theater is ready according to your request. Do you want to go take a look? He looked at Gu Nianji inquiringly. Gu Nianji put down her arm. I'll go take a look. I also need to check Wen Shuyi's vital signs first. Send her to the operating theater immediately, He Qingjian ordered. He Qingjian's personal secretary ordered someone to bring the 3 people who had fainted out of the simulation ward and sent them to the 3 operating theaters. Qin Yaoguang was brought to the operating theater where Qin Bei was. She was puzzled. Why is it my father? Where's Shuyi? Aren't I going to operate on Shuyi? Director Qin, your father is old and his condition might be even more serious. Don't you want to operate on your father first? He Qingjian's personal secretary said politely, otherwise you'll have to bear the consequences. Qin Yaoguang heard that this made sense and quickly said, then I'll treat my father first. You guys take Shuyi to the infirmary next door and wait. After I finish operating on my father, I'll go and operate on her immediately. He Qingjian's personal secretary didn't comment. He made a pleased gesture and closed the door of the operating theater. In another strangely decorated operating theater, Gu Nianji put on a full surgical gown, a surgical cap, a large mask and dark glasses to cover her eyes. Because of the damage from infrasonic weapons, it wasn't difficult to recover from it. The simplest and most crude method was to put it in a vacuum environment and rely entirely on the human body's own healing ability to heal. This would have some sequelae such as the function of some organs being damaged and not as good as before. After Gu Nianji reorganized the information she had downloaded, she chose a plan to repair first and then heal it. In other words, she would first use a CT scan to determine the damage to the body. If it needed to be repaired, it would be repaired first and then placed in a vacuum. The infrasonic injuries suffered by Wen Shuyi and He Zhichu were all neurological and did not involve their internal organs. In other words, there were no external injuries visible to the naked eye, so there was no need to use a scalpel to repair them. Gu Nianji then measured the damage caused by the infrasonic frequency to the nerves. Finally, she used the computer to control the gamma knife to repair the nerves. She had never controlled a gamma knife before, so she didn't know where it would land on the human body. However, she opened a back door for her computer and let Lu Jin hack in. Lu Jin directly controlled the gamma knife through her computer. She pretended to be focused on the surgery and hid it from the people monitoring the operating theater. In fact, the people monitoring the operating theater didn't see that Gu Nianji was only pretending. Lu Jin had actually performed the surgery, but to outsiders, it looked like Gu Nianji had performed a flawless gamma knife surgery. The surgery was soon completed, and when Shuyi was sent to the vacuum ward, she should be able to wake up after 6 hours. After the surgery, He Qingjian, who had been standing in front of the monitor watching Gu Nianji perform the surgery, was speechless. He said to his personal secretary in confusion, "Is there really a genius like Gu Nianji in this world? She's never studied medicine before, but she was able to perform this gamma knife surgery almost perfectly." He Qingjian's personal secretary was very open-minded. He smiled and said, "Chief, the gamma knife isn't a real scalpel. It's a ray controlled by a computer. Miss Gu's computer skills are very high, so it shouldn't be difficult for her to control the gamma knife well, right? Is that so?" He Qingjian looked at the surveillance video with emotion and muttered to himself, "Maybe she's a genius. After all, she's the daughter of a genius." This was the first time in 8 years that He Qingjian didn't call Gu Xiangguan a lunatic. This was today's second update, Chapter 1687, The Daughter of a Genius. Today was Monday. I forgot to ask for recommendation votes in the morning. Monday's recommendation votes were especially important. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1699. He Qingjin's personal secretary was keenly aware of this change, but he cleverly pretended not to hear anything. He also had a strong desire to survive. Gu Nianji walked out of the operating theater, took off her mask and let out a long sigh. Although she wasn't the chief surgeon, she had been nervously watching Lu Jin's operation the entire time. It was no different from her performing the surgery herself. Her back was covered in sweat, her sideburns were also drenched in sweat, and a few strands of black hair were wet on her forehead. Hua Xiaoheng had been leaning against the wall next to the operating theater door, quietly waiting for her. When he saw her come out, he quickly went up to her with a soft, fluffy white towel and patiently wiped the tiny beads of sweat on her forehead and face. Gu Nianji closed her eyes and almost drowned in Hua Xiaoheng's rare gentleness. However, she only allowed herself a moment of weakness before pushing him away. She took the towel from him and wiped herself. She smiled at him. "Thank you, Mr. Peter." Hua Xiaoheng adjusted the laces on the back of her surgical gown and said calmly, "Are you tired? What do you want to eat? The He family chef is ready." Gu Nianji, her eyes darkened and she shook her head. She whispered, "I don't want to eat. I don't have an appetite. I want to sleep." Gu Nianji, who was wearing a large surgical gown, looked exceptionally weak and slender. Hua Xiaoheng almost couldn't resist hugging her tightly. At that moment, a person rushed over from the opposite side of the corridor and shouted at them, "Where's Shui? I still have to operate on Shui." Hua Xiaoheng suddenly retracted his hand and stood beside Gu Nianji, looking over with her. The person who ran over was actually Qin Yaoguang. She also seemed to have just come down from an operation. She didn't even change out of her surgical gown before running over to operate on Wen Shui. Gu Nianji saw Qin Yaoguang's anxious expression and suddenly didn't feel tired at all. She played with the white towel in her hand and smiled. "Director Qin, I'm sorry but I've already finished operating on Wen Shui." "You? Weren't you operating on Xie Qingying?" Qin Yaoguang's pupils constricted. "Why are you operating on Wen Shui? I did it much faster than you." Gu Nianji shrugged and said casually, "After I finished the surgery for Xie Qingying, I saw that you were still busy, so I asked General He for permission. After getting his permission I also operated on Wen Shui. I'm happy to tell you that the operation was very successful. Wen Shui's health was not damaged at all. She has been sent to the vacuum ward." Her fingers caressed Wen Shui's hair and blood samples in her pocket, and her heart bloomed with joy. She had left these behind when she was preparing for the surgery. If she had the chance, she would send them back to Lu Jin so that he could do a DNA test as soon as possible. "What? This is impossible." Qin Yaoguang shouted. "You mean in the time it took me to perform one surgery you performed two? Oh my god. What do you take them for? Is he your lab rat? Can such a hasty experiment be seen? Are you trying to kill me? There's nothing I can do if you don't believe me. Wen Shui is in the vacuum ward anyway. If you're worried you can do the surgery again yourself." Gu Nianji's face darkened as well. "Anyway, you're especially good at taking credit for other people's achievements. You can do the surgery I did again and the credit will be yours. Do you think others don't know what you're planning?" Qin Yaoguang was furious from Gu Nianji's words. She was also a proud person and she was so agitated that her entire body trembled. She pointed at Gu Nianji and said with a trembling voice, Okay. I'll wait to see how badly you hurt Shui. When the time comes I'll sue you until I die." When Shui signed a voluntary form. "Dean Qin, wake up. Stop daydreaming in broad daylight." Gu Nianji said sarcastically, "Besides, are you sure you want to sue me? Your own lawsuit hasn't been closed yet. You should worry about whether your father will be safe or not." Qin Yaoguang's chest heaved violently, and her expression changed. It took her a lot of effort to suppress her anger and said, "I don't believe it. I want to see General He. I want to see Shui's condition." She had a feeling that Gu Nianji would take the opportunity to kill Wen Shui. He Chengjian saw this scene on the surveillance camera and shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "This Gu Nianji really knows how to cause trouble for me. Old Zhou, I'll go out first. You can go back after you've made the arrangements." He gave a few instructions to his personal secretary and went to Gu Nianji and Qin Yaoguang's side. Miss Gu's reaction is so fast. He Qingjian's personal secretary, Old Zhou, clicked his tongue and quickly arranged everything on his side. Xie Qingying was also sent to the vacuum ward and would only come out after 6 hours. The surveillance on her side was equivalent to a copy of the surveillance footage of Gu Nianji performing Wen Shui's surgery. However, the person on the hospital bed was Xie Qingying. All of this was being done on the surveillance terminal. Even if Lu Jin came close, he wouldn't be able to tell if it was real or fake. He Qingjian walked over with his orderly and frowned. This is the surgical area. Don't make any noise. Qin Yaoguang turned her head and saw that He Qingjian had arrived. Her eyes immediately turned red and she choked. General He, be fair. Gu Nianji really performed 2 surgeries? Is Shuyi really fine? He Qingjian glanced at her and said calmly, yes, Nianji finished the surgery for Miss Xie and saw that there was still time, so she applied to me to perform the surgery for Wen Shuyi. I saw that she did a good job for Xie Qingying, so I agreed. You're only halfway through. Wouldn't it be better to perform the surgery for Wen Shuyi earlier? It's good, but she doesn't have any experience at all. How can she do it? Qin Yaoguang wouldn't believe that Gu Nianji had done it herself. This isn't a normal surgery. Isn't it just a gamma knife? Gu Nianji pursed her lips. With your computer skills you can perform gamma knife surgery, let alone me. Qin Yaoguang, if I really use a scalpel I'm indeed not as good as you, but gamma knife, what do you think? These words seemed to make sense and Qin Yaoguang didn't know how to refute them. He Qingjian saw that she was in a daze and raised his chin towards the vacuum ward. Director Qin, I'll take you there to see Wen Shuyi. Her vital signs are all displayed. You'll know what's going on when you take a look for yourself. Okay, take me there quickly. Qin Yaoguang said anxiously. She didn't trust Gu Nianji's skills. He Qingjian took her to the vacuum ward. In the operating room, Qin Yaoguang's eyes widened as she looked at the various data displays on the dashboard. How is this possible? Is this true? She actually recovered so well. Qin Yaoguang muttered, her eyes flickering. The heartbeat, pulse, blood pressure and breathing rate displayed on the instrument were almost exactly the same as a normal person's, except that the brain activity wasn't high enough. However, the brain activity was because Wen Shuyi had been given a sleep promotion injection. She was in a deep sleep, so the data was very normal. Overall, Wen Shuyi's vital signs after the surgery were much stronger than Qin Bei's. In other words, the surgery Gu Nianji had performed on Wen Shuyi was much more precise and perfect than the surgery Qin Yaoguang had performed on Qin Bei. This realization was like a heavy hammer that hammered into Qin Yaoguang's mind. She felt her brain buzz as if a hornet's nest had just been poked, and a large swarm of hornets had run into her brain. The rampage made her both upset and have a splitting headache. He Qingjian glanced sideways at Qin Yaoguang and smiled. I don't understand these data either. Can Dean Qin explain it to me? How could he not understand? He was deliberately stabbing her in the heart with a knife, wasn't he? Qin Yaoguang rubbed her temples. Her face was so pale that there was no trace of blood. Dean Qin? I just heard you say that if anything happened to Shuyi, you would tell Nianji until she died, so you should explain these data. If it's really not good, I support you in suing her. He Qingjian continued as if he was completely on her side. However, Qin Yaoguang knew how unfathomable He Qingjian was. Therefore, the Qin family didn't dare to play any tricks in front of He Qingjian in the past. Every word he said had an ambiguous meaning. Qin Yaoguang pursed her lips and reluctantly admitted, fortunately, these data are still normal. Then did Gu Nianji use the surgery to harm Wen Shuyi? He Qingjian asked again, his voice even softer and slower. It seemed like He Qingjian had heard her shouting in the corridor just now. Qin Yaoguang was so embarrassed that she couldn't show her face. However, under He Qingjian's sparkling gaze she could only continue to shake her head and say, no, she didn't. What about the surgery? The surgery was done very well. Even if I did it, I could only do so well, Qin Yaoguang said with emotion. She should have studied medicine. Her father and I are both geniuses in this field. She must be too. He Qingjian smiled. She is indeed a genius. She is the daughter of a genius. He then opened the door to the operating room. Let's go. This isn't a place to rest. You just finished the surgery. Have a good rest. Qin Yaoguang saw that He Qingjian still remembered to care about her, and a wave of passion rose in her heart. Maybe the situation wasn't that bad, right? As soon as she woke He Zhichu up, her case would definitely be closed. Maybe she could even return to He Qingjian's side. Qin Yaoguang smiled generously at He Qingjian and put on the airs of a scientist. She said reservedly, okay, I'll go rest. As soon as I wake up, I'll perform surgery on young Master He. I'm too tired now. The effect of the surgery right now won't be good. He Qingjian didn't comment. He turned around and walked out first. After Qin Yaoguang went out, she was taken to a room guarded by a special person to rest. Gu Nianji and Hua Xiaoheng returned to their suite in the He residence. Hijichu was asleep in the room next door to her. After Gunyenji washed up, she took a glass of warm milk to the room next door to see Hijichu. Hijichu lay on the bed with his eyes closed like a sleeping beauty. His eyelashes were black and long, like 2 rows of crow wings. They also had the effect of eyeliner and mascara, covering his pair of shimmering almond-shaped eyes that were emotionless but also moving. His straight nose bridge was high and aloof, and his thin lips were slightly curled up. He seemed to be smiling but also seemed to be mocking. Gunyenji took a sip of milk and thought to herself, "Young master, sleep a little longer. Your princess will come and kiss you awake soon." Qingjian didn't allow her to tell anyone about Xie Qingying wearing Qin Yaoguang's special surgical gown. It was obvious that he wanted Hijichu to owe Xie Qingying a big favor. This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1688, Sleeping Beauty. Remind everyone of your monthly votes and recommendation votes. Please vote all the recommendation votes, okay? It was 8 o'clock in the evening, the second update. Moi, all the big shots and little angels, that you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.